morning, everybody. It's 7 o'clock. On today's programme, developments from the Middle East overnight, with the Israeli army reporting what it calls the deadliest attack on its troops since the war began, Amanda.
And we'll get reaction to that from the government minister shortly.
Yeah, we certainly will, Gareth.
Plus, roll out the red carpet. Oscars nominations day, of course. We'll look ahead to the top picks at 9:45. And at 9:20, we'll be joined by a guest who prides himself on making Yorkshire puddings the size of a toddler.
Tuesday, 23rd of January.
The Israeli army this morning has announced the deaths of 21 soldiers killed yesterday in a single incident in the Gaza Strip.
That, as the Defence Secretary says, fresh UK-US strikes against Houthi targets in Yemen overnight were self-defence. Could a new blood test revolutionise diagnoses for people with suspected Alzheimer's? After Isha, now comes Jocelyn, as a second storm bears down on the UK and Ireland today. Bankrupt cancels a special report from our People and Politics correspondent about the communities fighting to keep hold of their properties.
What's your message to the council if it starts to eye up your nice little building here?
Well, keep your hands off, really.
Just what you do up there in little old Pennsylvania, earn that kind of money.
I'm a police officer.
A filmmaking giant, Cher, leads tributes to the Hollywood star Norman Jewison, who's died at the age of 97. Hello, everybody. A very good morning to you. Thank you for joining us on The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. We begin with a development in the Middle East and news of a fresh round of UK-US airstrikes against Houthi targets in Yemen. The Defence Secretary says it was self-defence following continued attacks on international vessels in the Red Sea. Let's get more, should we? Alistair is standing by for us this morning. Hello to you, Alistair. Two stories to talk about this morning. Morning to you.
Morning, Kay. Well, firstly, the news that has broken within the last couple of hours. The Israeli military announced that yesterday at around 4 p.m. an incident happened in the Gaza Strip, close to the Gaza border with Israel. Troops were trying to lay mines in a couple of buildings, in order to destroy them because they believed they were part of the Hamas infrastructure. And an RPG, a rocket-propelled grenade, was fired towards a tank that was securing the area. At the same time, those two buildings exploded and collapsed, killing 21 Israeli soldiers inside. That's the biggest single loss of life in any one day for the Israeli military since October the 8th. It takes the overall Israeli military death toll during the war to 218. And important to note, the fighting is still going on very fiercely in Gaza. Yesterday, 190 Palestinians were killed in the fighting. And then late last night, a second wave of US and UK airstrikes on Houthi targets in Yemen. The British again using Typhoon jets from RAF Aktiri in Cyprus, the Americans using a combination of sea and air assets to carry out those strikes. The Americans have carried out other strikes since the first wave and the second wave, but this is the second time that the British military has got involved.
OK, for now, thank you. Amanda, chatting to you in just a second. We have heard from the Defence Secretary. He has been speaking, and this is a statement that he has made. Let me bring it to you. Dangerous Houthi attacks on shipping in the Red Sea have continued to threaten the lives of sailors and disrupt shipping at an intolerable cost to the global economy. Along with our US partners, we have conducted a further round of strikes in self-defence. Two things here. How often can they do that? And confusion over whether or not Labour were told about it.
Yes, indeed. So technically the government don't have to consult Parliament to get the right to take military action in this way. It's what we saw happen last time. There was a bit of kickback from some of the opposition parties, particularly the Liberal Democrats and the SNP, who wanted Parliament to be recalled and have a vote. But Labour were very supportive of the decision to take military action because of the ongoing attacks on shipping, the danger to people in the Red Sea, and obviously the impact on the global economy. The legal justification that was given by the government was that this was action that was necessary and proportionate in self-defence. We've got echoing that language this time, and also the statements in support of the kind of broader partnership, the US, the UK, Canada, Australia, Bahrain as well. But yes, as you say, this time around, Labour it's a bit unclear as to whether or not they were informed in advance, because last time we were told, Sir Keir Starmer, Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker of the House, were called to Downing Street after a cabinet briefing about the first of these strikes that was held just under 2 weeks ago. This time around, we understand from Labour they're saying we weren't briefed, but the government sources are telling us they did brief Labour. So not sure what's going on there, but clearly a bit of a breakdown in communication, and it doesn't sound like Labour are nearly as happy as they were in supporting this.
Yeah, I'm sure that's going to develop throughout the day. Amanda, for now, thanks very much indeed. I want to talk about Alzheimer's as well. I don't know if you've seen the front pages of quite a lot of the papers today, including the Telegraph, Times, talking about a breakthrough, which is a simple blood test that can detect Alzheimer's 10 to 15 years before any symptoms.
Yeah, and the accuracy rates are remarkable as well, 96 and 97% accurate. And when you look at the figures, 1 in 14 people over the age of 65 will have Alzheimer's, 1 in 6 over the age of 80. So if you can diagnose that, like you say, 10 to 15 years earlier, surely have huge implications for people's care going forwards.
Yeah, the thing is, if you diagnose it, then what happens, and what sort of treatment's available, and can the NHS afford it?
Well, absolutely. That's a million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, some people might not want to know that they've got that coming down the line, but I think the suggestion is there are treatments that are particularly good if they can be targeted early on. So the hopes that if those are given before you actually have the symptoms developing, then that will help protect you for longer.
Why don't we bring in Thomas Moore, who will probably have cleverer views than us on this. He's our science correspondent, medical correspondent as well. Of course, hi, Thomas, good to see you. So it's a blood test, and it can tell you if you have Alzheimer's.
Yeah, and it is really exciting, and it takes us towards a screening test for Alzheimer's for the first time. It detects a protein in the blood that's also found in the brains of people with the disease, and the scientists in Sweden say it is as accurate as existing tests. Now, at the moment, Alzheimer's is diagnosed either with specialist brain scans, but the NHS doesn't have enough of those machines, or through special spinal fluid samples, and the NHS doesn't have enough specialist staff to do that. So even if people do get a diagnosis, it comes because there are now drugs coming down the tracks that for the first time have been shown to slow the decline in memory and other brain symptoms, but they have to be given at an early stage. This blood test could allow that to happen. Now, it needs to be validated in more people, in bigger clinical trials, in a more diverse population, but the hope is that everyone over the age of 50 could one day get this test, and it could turn the tide on a devastating disease.
OK, for now, thanks very much, Thomas. Thank you.
Prepare for more bad weather. The UK and Ireland are braced for yet another storm. That's after Storm Isha. Now Storm Jocelyn is bearing down. Amelia Harper has this report.
Storm Isha in full force in Brighton, and there's more to come. Another storm is following swiftly today. Jocelyn, expected to hit Scotland the hardest. 2 men died in car accidents involving fallen trees here in Fife in Scotland and in Northern Ireland. Isha hit most parts of the UK with wind speeds of up to 90 miles an hour, and yet some still took a chance. In Lincolnshire, another close call when this roof was ripped from a house. As planes struggled to touch down, landing became a lottery. Passengers watched from the inside at aborted landings. This Lufthansa flight was seconds from Dublin Airport when the pilot was forced to go all the way back to Munich.
Go on.
and there could be more to come. The 10th named storm in 5 months is on its way.
Storm Isha could have, caused some problems, weakened structures, weakened trees that may then come down as a result of Storm Jocelyn. So although Storm Jocelyn isn't as intense, there is a higher chance than usual that this storm could cause some disruption because it's following so closely after a previous storm.
Parts of the UK are only just recovering from one weather event, and with a second battering in less than 48 hours, it can only mean more disruption and a danger to life once again. Amelia Harper, Sky News.
A gunman who was on the run for allegedly killing 8 people in Illinois is believed to have fatally shot himself after a confrontation with officers. Police had launched a manhunt for 23-year-old Romeo Nance after he was suspected of shooting dead 8 people at 3 locations in Chicago. Donald Trump has taken aim at his last remaining rival for the Republican nomination to become US president. Now, a 2-horse race, the pair will be hoping to win over the state of New Hampshire today in the latest primary.
So if you want a losing candidate who puts America last, vote for Nikki Haley. But if you want a president who puts America first every single time, you're going to vote for Donald J. Trump, and you have to get out and vote.
The House of Lords has defied Rishi Sunak by voting against the ratification of the UK's new treaty with Rwanda. Peers backed a motion to delay the controversial deportation agreement until the government can prove the country is safe. The treaty is separate to the Rwanda Safety Bill, which will be debated in the Lords next week. A former Post Office investigator is due to give evidence today at the ongoing inquiry into the Horizon scandal. Robert Daly was involved in the investigations of sub-postmasters Peter Holmes and William Quorm, both of whom were convicted of criminal offences and died before their names were cleared. Mr Holmes' widow told Sky News she wants to know why the investigator ignored her husband's good record as a former police officer.
He didn't listen to the fact that Peter had a good record. He had as I say, an ex-policeman. Nobody believed him, and I just wish somebody had just listened to him and said, "This." I mean, it was obvious he wasn't guilty.
Now, local authorities in the UK are coming under increasing financial strain, with more and more declaring themselves bankrupt. In an attempt to balance the books, some councils are putting properties such as parks and libraries up for sale. Tell me more.
There's trouble at the town halls
across
the country, actually, Kay. And it's all about rising inflation and all that relentless pressure.
Is your mic on? Tell me, is your mic on?
And my microphone should be on.
Try the other one. There you go.
Should we see?
Can I do it for you? There you go.
I'll just keep doing that.
There you go. That's what we do in the trade.
Now, some people would argue, Kay, that was preferable.
Never.
But we'll just see about that.
Never.
What I was saying was there's trouble at a lot of town halls across the country. It's all about rising inflation, soaring demand on things like social services, and increasingly councils are declaring them effectively bankrupt. It's not an interesting title, but it's called Section 114. But what it means is they don't have enough money next year to provide the services that we all expect them to provide. So what are they doing? They're starting to sell things off, a bit like in Monopoly when you run out of money.
OK.
So we've been to Birmingham.
Haven't you?
We've been to Birmingham to see a community who are fighting back.
Here we go.
It's tea and social afternoon in the Sons of Rest Community Centre in the middle of Handsworth Park in Birmingham. But this council building and hundreds of other places like parks, libraries and landmarks could be sold off to make money because the council is effectively bankrupt.
This is a jewel in the crown, this place. It contributes to social cohesion. If you ever want an example of a multiracial society which is under a lot of pressure at the moment working, look at this one. You get rid of this, where do we go?
The community is now using the law to register places like this as assets of community value to make it harder for the council to sell them.
What's your message to the council if it starts to eye up your nice little building here?
Well, keep your hands off, really, because this is a community place, you know, it's a valuable community place. And the message is not just to the council, but it's to central government and whoever comes in, is that, you know, resources should be properly resourced.
One by one, it appears councils in England are going bust. In July 2021, Slough Council issued what's called a Section 114 notice, effectively declaring itself bankrupt. More followed: Croydon, Woking, Thurrock, then Birmingham, and more recently Nottingham. Others are warning the same could happen to them, including Stoke-on-Trent, Middlesbrough, Somerset, Bradford and Cheshire East. Birmingham City Council told us it'll work with the community as it faces unprecedented financial challenges.
So what are their options here? Well, they could start to raise local taxes or cut services, or as the biggest landowner around here, they're already starting to sell off property. It's a bit like that stage in Monopoly when you've run out of money and your only option left is to get rid of your assets.
The future looks bleak. The local government association says 1 in 5 councils in England think they could go into effective bankruptcy this year or next. And that's bad news for the communities caught in the middle.
So this lady and others like her are saying, it's not our fault that you can't balance the books. Keep your mitts off.
Well, in Birmingham's case, they invested millions in an IT system that never worked, and they also got stung with a huge equal pay case that they're still trying to pay back. That's why their finances are in a mess. And other councils are struggling as well. Now, there are a couple of levers that can be pulled here. The government pay councils money every year. It's called the grant settlement. That'll be decided in February. There's enormous amount of pressure on the government to kind of inject a little bit more money into councils.
Yeah.
But, you know, some people might look at Birmingham and say, do they deserve a bailout from central government? They're in a financial mess. They should pull themselves out of it. But an election's coming, Kay. There's going to be a lot of unhappy people worried that their services are going to be cut or their taxes are going to rise, because that's really the only two options that councils have.
Yeah.
And so the government might be incentivised to do something about it. And for the first time, communities like Birmingham are using the law to try and ring-fence community centres like this, to say this is a community asset, get your hands off. So it's going to be really interesting, and I'd like to hear from community groups who are in a similar position. They know how to contact me, and we'll keep an eye on this story.
OK, I couldn't hear you earlier. I can't strut you up now. It's good.
I'm here all week.
Try the veal. If you want to know more about that story, you can scan the QR code on your screen to read Nick's full report on our website. Where is it? It's coming up. There it is for you. Scan that QR code. Thanks very much. A quick look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Storm Jocelyn will bring further wet and windy conditions, but won't be as severe as Storm Isha. Although quieter from the middle of the week, the weather will remain unsettled. There's an amber wind warning for northern and western Scotland, valid from this evening. A yellow wind warning covers a wider area, while rain warnings are in place for parts of the northwest. It'll be a mostly dry but rather cloudy start to eastern areas, with a touch of frost in places.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Transport Minister Huw Merriman is here with us this morning. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Hello,
I wonder
Kay.
if you can just update me first on what's been happening overnight in relation to the military action against the Houthis.
Yeah, further strikes with our allies, the US, Netherlands, Canada. Again, a sort of message being sent out to the Houthis that we will not stand by whilst they attack international shipping and risk lives. So the successful strikes, underground activity that they have targeted, and all is safe in terms of our personnel. I want to obviously extend my thanks to all those that have been involved in that mission.
Does this mean the previous strikes were not successful?
Well, those strikes sent a message to the Houthis that further strikes would take place if the Houthis did not desist from their action. They have not desisted, they've continued. So here we are again. And we will continue to take all steps that are necessary to protect international shipping, which is what everyone in this country would expect of us to do. And that's exactly what's occurred yesterday. The key now, and we've stepped up our international diplomacy efforts, is for those that back and control the Houthis to ensure that they put influence, or the other countries put influence on those who control, so that this de-escalates.
So are you ruling out further strikes or not?
No, of course not. We will always back up our words with action, but this action again demonstrates that this wouldn't just be a one-off if the Houthis continued. I mean, that would be the wrong thing to do. For us to take action and then the Houthis respond and then we do nothing would send out the completely wrong signal. So this demonstrates that we will be tough and we will take all measures required against the Houthis to protect international shipping and protect the lives of those who operate those ships.
Are you not concerned about increasing instability in the region that's already unstable?
Well, that's why it's important that we don't just take the action that was carried out last night. We also use our role in the international diplomacy circuit, and the Defence Secretary was in the region last week having those conversations. And of course, we urge all those that have the influence to use their influence, and that's how this matter will de-escalate. But we can't have a situation where we allow...
Sorry, just to interrupt. They say they're doing it because of the war in Gaza, and as soon as there's a ceasefire, they'll stop.
Well, look, the reality is that they are endangering international shipping. They're causing ships to change course. That impacts not just lives, but also global trade as well. So, you know, their actions are illegal, and illegal actions require a response from the international community, and that's exactly what we've delivered, and we will deliver whatever it takes to the Houthis to ensure that they desist. So we hope the message is now clear, this being a second time.
We hear from our Labour sources that you didn't give Sir Keir Starmer the courtesy of telling him about this before it happened.
Well, I can confirm that the Leader of the Opposition and indeed the Speaker were again given that information in the same way that they were the first time round. So I do not believe that to be a correct interpretation.
From Sir Keir Starmer's team.
Well, my understanding is that that information was conveyed, as I've been told by inside government. So, yes, indeed.
Let's see what happens during the day. Yeah. Rail prices, you want to talk about those. They're slashed on many routes across England and Wales. People can buy cheap tickets from today until next Tuesday?
Yes, that's right.
Why?
For travel between the beginning of February and the middle of March.
Okay.
So we've got over 1 million tickets that will be discounted by up to 50%. So hopefully you'll take that advantage to use rail as well, Kay. It's to get more people onto our railways and to try and grow our railways back. We recognise that there's a cost of living challenge for many, and we used a sale like this a couple of years ago and found that 70,000 people who hadn't used the railways before used it because it was so attractive. So we hope that they will then stick with rail. And that's why we're doing this again. So it's an opportunity for people to get out, see their loved ones, make that trip across the country they perhaps wanted to make, and all at a very good price.
Do you think rail prices should be cheaper generally?
Well, look, we always do our best to limit them, but the indication that we always use is July's inflation rate, which would have been 9% if that had been taken, but we've introduced 4.9% instead. So what we try and do is balance between the passenger that uses the service but also the UK taxpayer that continues to subsidise rail, because post-pandemic we just haven't seen the numbers come back. So the railways make a loss, and it means that just in the last financial year, the UK taxpayer had to contribute £12 billion, which is £420 per household. And of course, many of those people won't use rail. So it's that question of being fair to all, but also continuing to invest in our railways, which is vital, and that's why reluctantly prices have to go up.
Hugely important. I mean, looking at what's been happening with Storm Isha, you know, the rail services have been incredibly badly affected. The infrastructure is not as good as it should be. We've
had the challenges from the storms, and we've got another one, as your report mentioned, coming in. It's been a really challenging time for the railway as a result. But what I would say is, since 2010, we've invested £100 billion into the railways. We have 8,000 new modern railway carriages that hadn't been had before. People used to talk about how poor the onboard facilities were. And so whilst there are still challenges for us to correct, I readily accept that, and that's every day, that's what I'm focused on. I also think it's really important to talk up our railways. You know, we almost got the 200th anniversary of the birth of the railways in this country. People love their railways. For most people, their railway journey is a good one. It arrives on time. But my focus, of course, has to be for the minority that don't, and I'm determined to do better for them.
But no high-speed rail link between London and Manchester?
Well, we're building 140 miles of it from London to Birmingham. But yes, you're right. Our plan, the Prime Minister's plan, is to divert that money, the £36 billion, away from the HS2 northern part and spend it on really good, solid transport projects across the entirety of the north, bringing them the opportunities they wouldn't have had, for example, in Hull, Bradford, Leeds, where there'll be multi-billion-pound investments. They wouldn't, of course, have seen that return if HS2 had just gone to Manchester. So it was a tough choice. I wonder if it started in Manchester, whether it would have continued on to London. Well, look, hindsight is always a wonderful thing, and that's well before my time, Kay. But what I would say is we have a plan. The Prime Minister set it out. We're determined to deliver that rather than go back to square one with Keir Starmer, who doesn't seem to have a plan. He hasn't confirmed whether HS2 will go ahead or not. And more importantly, for the places like Bradford...
Did you just say Keir Starmer's not got a plan?
Well, not when it comes to HS2, because he went to Manchester...
You know you guys say he's not got a plan every day, don't you?
Well, because it's true. 2 weeks ago, he went up to Manchester and then said that he would not be delivering HS2 further north.
Stand by.
We have a plan, we're working to it. People will start to see the benefits of that. And it goes against Keir Starmer, who doesn't actually have a plan.
Labour don't get this, but we get it, that we need a very clear plan.
Labour can't say what they would do because they have no plan.
Labour, by contrast,
I knew you were going to
has no plan. They have no plan whatsoever.
I wish I just
no
said
plan on immigration, no plan on the economy.
Labour have got no plan. To be on our wall.
Well, I'm happy to be on the wall. I'll tell you why there's no plan, because we've said we'll invest £36 billion across these cities and towns in the North and the Midlands.
OK.
And the Labour Party have not said they'll back that, but 2 weeks ago, Keir Starmer went to Manchester and said he wouldn't deliver HS2. So where's the money going? That is why I think I'm entitled to say he has no plan, because he doesn't have a plan.
You're on the wall, trust me.
I'm on the wall. I'm proud to be on the wall.
Just before I let you go, is the BBC biased?
Well, I used to chair the all-party parliamentary group for the BBC, so I've always been a friend of the BBC. But let me give you an example. I know that you were searching for them yesterday. I was listening to the news quiz, which is on Radio 4 at 6:30 on Friday. I was driving from my constituency office to the home. For 10 minutes, all I heard, and it wasn't satirical, it was just diatribe against Conservatives, not the government. And I did listen to that and think, for goodness sake, where is the balance in that? So, yes, I'm afraid to say, despite the fact that I've always been a big supporter of the BBC, that struck me as completely biased.
OK, you understand that a news quiz is comedy and nothing to do with actual news?
There was nothing in that 10 minutes that was remotely...
But you do understand that it's not
Of course, no, I would be the first one. I love it when politicians get
quiz.
lampooned, but that was the whole point. There wasn't actually anything in it, in that particular regard, which struck me as being sort of amusing. It was actually just more the drive. It may not be the news quiz, but it was 6:30 on a Friday, and, as I say, it didn't strike me as being particularly satirical. It was just people standing up.
So you do think they're biased?
Well, that was just... Look, listen to the first 10 minutes. I challenge any of your audience to it.
Do you think BBC News is biased?
It was totally biased, and it was just completely...
Do you think BBC News is biased?
I think there are times when the BBC could do better, and when I chaired the all-party parliamentary group, then I felt that the BBC could do better.
Give me examples.
I think some of its content when it comes to social affairs, and I felt this when I used to work for the Department of Work and Pensions, didn't necessarily give two sides of the story.
Give me examples.
I have found examples in there. So that was again, I don't want to be personal.
Now, I know you've had 24 hours to think about it. So you must have got specific examples of when BBC News has been biased. Give me one.
So when I worked at the Department for Work and Pensions and I was working on universal credit, there was an individual there who would report on it, Neil Buchanan, who I always felt gave one side of the story and not the other side, which was the government side that I was working really hard on because I believed in universal credit. So that would be my working example when I worked there.
We have some substance that we can now go back to them on. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Okay, thank you always.
Thank you. It's great to see you. So let me talk to you in a bit more detail about those strikes that we've just been hearing from the Minister. He says that Labour have been told about it. The strikes happened last night. They were to complement strikes that have already taken place against the Houthis, and he did not rule out further strikes in future, Amanda, if they were necessary.
Well, absolutely. He said we're seeing those attacks on international shipping and people's lives within the Red Sea. And we've said to the Houthis, if you don't stop, then we will take further action. So we've got to back up our words with action. So that was quite a resolute signal there, I thought. Also interesting, flagging the sort of diplomatic activity going on behind the scenes to put pressure on the Houthis.
A quick thought on what he was saying about the BBC?
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, someone who's always been a big supporter of the BBC, but clearly I think the government have a line on this one. And, you know, it's not entirely supportive of
Well, at least he gave me an example
indeed.
that we can go back to the organisation now and say, well, what about this? And see what they come back with. It's good to see you. Thank you. Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you. Following the Duchess of York's diagnosis, we speak to an expert about how you can check yourself for skin cancer. Plus, we'll look at some of the tributes being paid to the filmmaker Norman Jewison, who has died at the age of 97. And how far would you drive to sink your teeth into these whoppers? Take a look at this 1 foot long Yorkshire pudding.
Independent United Kingdom.
These last few years have seen some huge stories. And these stories have been driven by politics, by politicians, the people in power.
You must stay at home.
And it's my job to figure out how these decisions made by politicians impact all of us in our everyday lives.
This is the worst thing I've ever been through in my life.
People turn up here with their child stuff in a black sack and just say, I don't want to.
And that is what it is. It's first-class poverty.
Is this an example of the welfare state failing?
We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
These are stories that affect us all. Millions of children are now having to catch up. Some stories have changed all of our lives. Because like the residents, the staff are being infected. Politicians, they make decisions all of the time, and it's our job to hold them to account. I wonder if you will take this opportunity to apologise to those families. But in the end, the real power doesn't actually lie with the politicians. The real power lies with the people. I'm Nick Martin. I'm the People and Politics correspondent at Sky News.
Hello again, everybody. You're watching The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. We made news in a lot of the papers overnight, didn't we, with our chat that we had with the Minister yesterday, who was perhaps at times struggling to explain why she felt that the BBC was on occasion biased. The Minister this morning has had 24 hours to come up with some cases of when he thinks the BBC is biased, including...
Comedy. Comedy is going... That's now the news quiz, a comedy satirical panel show. Apparently the first 10 minutes of that was biased. But this is the issue, the conflagration between, or the conflation between what's BBC News and what's the BBC. Next, it's going to be, BBC food bias towards fruit and veg or meat.
Oh, it's getting under your skin.
It does get under my skin because it's the erosion of things that we hold dear. And the fact that now comedy is being attacked.
Anti-Beeb next, aren't you?
Now that comedy is being attacked, I just think it's slightly scary, personally.
Oh, I think we've heard this from the Tories before, though, haven't we? They're not very happy about a lot of the satirical programmes because they feel, they're in government, so they are going to be the target of a lot of this kind of comedy. But, it is a different question, isn't it? Like you said, Kay, the point here is about news and impartiality and whether there is evidence for that, whether it's opinion. I think we've all experienced when you get people giving opinions of bias on both sides, and generally you hope that if you stick down the middle, you'll be OK. But
yeah, this is what she said yesterday, the Minister. Do you think the BBC is biased?
Well, I am looking at this from the point of view of the Culture Secretary.
Yeah,
and
that's why I'm asking you.
And,
so do you think they're biased?
And the evidence shows that there is a perception of bias. The evidence of bias is what audiences believe is the content of the BBC and
but that's
how
perception,
they...
That's not evidence. That's perception.
That is evidence. That is evidence. Impartiality is about perception of the things that are being broadcast by the BBC.
Just a reminder, she is a King's Counsel.
But if I perceive this pen to be an apple, does that make it an apple? Of course it doesn't. That's not a fact. It's still a pen. I just find it worrying. I really do.
It's a nice pen.
Sorry?
It's a nice pen.
It is a nice pen, but it's not an apple. I can tell you that's a fact. Let's bring you some other facts.
Yes,
Our top stories this morning, shall we? The Defence Secretary has said a fresh round of UK and US airstrikes against Houthi targets in Yemen were in self-defence. It's the second time British forces have taken part in strikes on the Iran-backed militants in response to attacks on Red Sea ships. That as the Israeli military says at least 21 of its soldiers have been killed in Gaza in the deadliest attack since the war began. A new blood test could change the way Alzheimer's is diagnosed, with the disease detected 15 years before symptoms. Trials found the test to be at least as accurate as current diagnoses, options that are currently detecting signs. The UK and Ireland are braced for more bad weather as Storm Jocelyn, the second storm in as many days, hits the British Isles. And campaigners in Birmingham have launched action to keep council-run properties open. It's over fears community centres, parks and libraries could soon close to help pay the council's £87 million debt.
Now, the Duchy of York, Sarah Ferguson, has urged people to be diligent and check their moles after being diagnosed with skin cancer within a year of being diagnosed with breast cancer and having a mastectomy. Let's talk about it in more detail. Michelle Baker, CEO of the Melanoma Fund, is here with us. Nice to see you. Thank you for joining us on the programme. What a terrible diagnosis for her.
Absolutely, and especially straight after a breast cancer diagnosis. But we've been talking about this, and in a way, if it wasn't for that diagnosis, she wouldn't have had the surgeons or the dermatologists look her over for this malignant mole, and that could have taken her life. I'm really hoping it was caught early.
Is it quite usual for someone who is diagnosed with a cancer for then to be checked and a skin cancer discovered?
Not necessarily. Basically, a skin check is something we should all carry out on a monthly basis.
I was going to ask you about it.
Absolutely. So Sarah Ferguson obviously is a type 1 skin type, so she has very fair redhead.
Because she's a redhead. Yeah.
Absolutely, and that puts her in the firing line for melanoma and all types of skin cancer. So really, if you have that skin type, you need to check your skin, not just once a month, but really get to know it. Just putting sunscreen on when you're out and about is absolutely vital.
Not just when the sun's shining.
No, so there's a lot of fear around sun protection because people don't want to cover up their skin from that lovely tan that we all think makes us look more attractive. But the fact is that if the UV index is over 2, so if it's, 3, if it's over 3 and over, we need to wear sunscreen from May to October. And that's not just on the beach. You know, sunscreen isn't just for the beach, it's for everyday use.
OK, so what do you need to do to check your moles?
OK, so there is a method called the ABCDE rule, and that basically talks about A for asymmetry, B for border, C for colour or change, E for evolution and D for diameter. So we need to look, basically, to boil this down, we need to look at change. So if we get anything that a mole or a lesion that is changing, bleeding, itching in any format, or if your intuition keeps going back to it and thinks, there is something about that, go and see your GP because early diagnosis is vital.
Now, we all have moles, don't we? But it's if they change colour, if they start to itch, as you were saying,
Absolutely.
or if they change shape.
Yeah, and if they have blurred edges, we know this because we'll go back to it. And if we get to know our skin, we can check. And it's not just moles, Kate, it's also lesions. So anything like an area of skin that looks different, a spot that doesn't heal, anything that scabs over. Because it's not just melanoma, there's also other types of skin cancer. Basal cell carcinoma, squamous cell, which is the most common cancer in the world, and rates are rising.
What's the most common cancer?
Basal cell and squamous cell, so non-melanoma skin cancer.
Melanoma is breast cancer in the UK, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. No, it's in the world. People don't look at skin cancer as you know, it's just skin cancer, but it's absolutely epidemic. If you ask any dermatologist, they are inundated with skin cancers.
And what's the recovery like from skin cancer?
Well, with melanoma, the recovery rates are good, but as I say, you have to get in there early. So if you're getting there early, you've got a 99% chance of getting over that. But if you're late, the odds go down the further you go down. So obviously it travels down into the lymph nodes, through to your lymph, and then into the rest of your body. And it can turn up anywhere, so we need to get in there much sooner.
OK, so it can cause other cancers?
Yes,
secondary
absolutely.
cancers.
Yes, it can cause secondary cancers. But as I say, it's, you know, skin cancer is very common. Melanoma is relatively rare, but it's more dangerous. But we need to protect ourselves, and that's not just, as I say, on the beach. We raise awareness for the Melanoma Fund. We raise awareness in sport and outdoor recreation. So we encourage people that play golf, tennis, cricket. If they're out there for prolonged periods, don't be afraid of sun protection. Slap it on because you're protecting your skin.
Building workers.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, you don't want to die of being macho.
No, and please, let's just get rid of this stigma that we have around sun protection. You know, we've got a wellness boom at the moment. We're all taking vitamins, we're creating this wellness in our body, but we're forgetting about our skin.
OK, it's good to see you. Thanks so much indeed for explaining that to us. Appreciate it. Thank you. Now to the US, where voters in New Hampshire are preparing to cast their ballots to choose this year's Republican presidential candidate. But given the indictments stacked against him, why are people still voting for Donald Trump? Mark Stone has more.
It's a week since Donald Trump stormed to victory in Iowa. His road back to the White House a little clearer. But why? How is a man so divisive, so polarizing, so surrounded by chaos, so popular still? An auction in Kansas. It draws ranchers and their cattle from across the state. This is a conservative heartland, yes, but the nostalgia for Donald Trump in particular is everywhere here.
I think Trump will change things around if he gets back in. I really do. I think it's going to get our border closed up, get things back to normal.
The economy is booming here in the Midwest. It is the all-American good life. The drawback to Trump seems to be as much about deep flaws they see on the other side.
When Trump was in office, it was a lot more steady. We're just on a roller coaster with Biden as far as what happens with our markets.
What about Trump the man? I mean, he's pretty unique.
He annoys me.
Why?
I think he needs to learn to keep his mouth shut on something.
But then a moment that cuts to the heart of a divide that's set so deep. What do you think the attraction of Trump is? Because he seems to still have such a hold on the country.
Absolutely nothing to me because me personally, I am engaged to a woman, so it's not a really safe thing around here to just outwardly express. I am currently searching for a state to live in and have a safe future. So that's something really real that I have to think about that a lot of people don't.
204 now, 5 now, a bit another 5, a bit another 6 here, a bit another now 7, a bit another.
What do you think about the two people that appear to be the front runners to be president?
I don't know why the Democrats and Republicans can't come up with younger candidates or candidates that don't have any baggage, but we're going to vote with who our nominees are.
And for you, that means Trump's the man.
Absolutely.
And so in a polarized nation, they'll choose who they're offered. And here, in the middle of America, beyond the extreme loyalists, the draw is back to Trump. Mark Stone, Sky News in Kansas.
More on that, of course, throughout the course of the year. Shaman is here to talk about Norman Jewison. Now, I heard about him on the radio this morning. Didn't realise he was 97, but some of the work that he has done, absolutely magnificent. Director, of course.
Of course, yeah, he has a long list of achievements. We're talking about 46 Academy Award nominations and 12 Oscars. Exactly. I mean, it's a legacy that film directors and filmmakers will be, longing for and really trying to aspire to. I mean, he's known for the play Jesus Christ Superstar, which of course was a rock opera, as well as films such as Moonstruck, A Soldier's Story, and The Russians Are Coming as well. I believe earlier we played a clip, didn't we, of The Heat of the Night, which starred Sidney Poitier. Now, that is a real example.
You've seen the movie?
I haven't personally.
Oh, you should. It's amazing.
Well, I've heard lots about it because it's a prime example of how he used his real-life experiences to be able to inform his art. So that is a film which is based on a black police officer who had to work with a racist police officer, and they come together and they solve crimes. And at the time, it was criticised for not being realistic, knowing what it was like, especially in the South, in the US. But his work was really about highlighting some of the struggles and the issues that took place in America. And this kind of makes sense why people like Cher, big hitters like Lee Grant have also praised his work as well.
Yeah, we've heard from Cher, actually, haven't we? I think, was it on Instagram? Let's have a quick look at what she was saying. There we go. She says, farewell, sweet prince. Thank you for one of the greatest, happiest, most fun experiences of my life. That's from Cher. Without you, I would not have my beautiful golden man. Guessing she's talking about an Oscar.
Yeah.
I'm guessing she's not we're in a lot of trouble.
I'm sure she has had some golden men in her life though at some point.
Good to see you. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you. We are going to be speaking to the Labour Shadow Health Minister, Karen Smith, about a revolutionary blood test diagnosis for people with suspected Alzheimer's plus.
Are we saying there's a chance that when we push that button, we destroy the world? Chances are near zero.
Talking about those golden men again, it's Oscar nominations time.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
It's turning everybody into, a crazy, violent drug addict.
How are you feeling?
I am angry.
It is an anti-woman agenda. 2 women say that you paid for their abortions. Are you a hypocrite, sir? Will your candidates win?
I hope so. I think they will. I think they're great candidates.
I gotta be realistic. My sister's dead.
More than 4 weeks on, there's no murder weapon and no suspect. Are you going to catch this killer?
We are doing everything we can.
Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded not guilty to all 6 charges against her. Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her.
We're so excited.
Severe nightmares of these people coming in and just taking me in the middle of the night.
I've watched as whole towns were torn apart by natural disaster.
I'm alive and I'm thankful for that, but there are a lot of people who aren't.
It's not the winds people fear most here, it's the water. We take you to the heart of the stories which shape our world. Do you truly believe what you're saying?
A lot of cases that I know are reported from Ukrainian missiles themselves.
Ambassador, with respect, I think that's preposterous.
Hello again, everybody. So about now, I was going to say welcome to the Labour Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, but he's not here. Karen Smith's here at the last minute. He's not very well.
No, he's not. We send him our best.
Yeah, we wish you better. He was going to do a speech as well later on today. What's it about?
It's about waste in the NHS and how we want to look at the money that's not been spent well in the NHS, but particularly to look at what that means for patients in terms of things like outpatient appointments and using technology to better inform people that they've got an appointment in the first place.
Yeah.
1 in 5 people don't even know they've actually got an appointment. So those wasted appointments.
How can that be?
Mainly because things get lost in the post. We've still got a paper system. Jeremy Hunt promised to get rid of the paper system, but over £200 million we think is still spent on those paper systems. Many hospitals do use things like text messages to let people know, to remind people, and where that happens, appointments wasted are down by about 50%.
OK.
So we want to see that happen in all systems.
One of the other figures that I'm sure you'll quote to me is about £1.7 billion waste keeping people in hospital beds due to the lack of social care in the community. How are you going to fix the social care in the community?
Well, that is a real concern about getting people out back into homes where people get better. So we've already talked about the need to stabilise the system in terms of the workforce. People don't get paid the same as they do in the NHS, so they're constantly losing staff and not being able to recruit into that system at a local level. We want to see the care homes better managed so that we don't have care homes that might go under at the last minute. And stabilising that system is a real core part of what that social care needs to look like in the future.
It's going to cost a lot of money to do that.
It will. We will lay out more detailed plans around the time of the election, and we've been working with people across the system about how that works. The government promised to fix this. Boris Johnson said he had fixed it. They've set things in train. We don't really know because they haven't really told us what's coming out of them looking at that system, and we need to know much more from them about how their fixing of the system has gone before we can make any further comments.
Your thoughts on this story leading quite a lot of the papers this morning about a blood test which can detect Alzheimer's up to 15 years before symptoms?
It's really good news, isn't it? This is a horrible disease.
Will it be available on the NHS on the label?
Well, yes, we want to see these drugs coming down the track. The concern I'd have at the moment is about the government's ability to deliver that to people. We've seen this week the measles outbreak, for example, that people haven't been able to get vaccinated for measles because that frontline system is not there in the way that it should be to get people to the right place to get the vaccine in place. So we know that great things are happening in our life sciences sector. We absolutely want to encourage that more. We did that when we were in government. That rate of research and development is leading to these great drugs.
So you're saying you would make it available?
Getting it from there to patients in delivery form is going to be the real test of this government.
So Labour would make it available on the NHS?
We want to see that there's fantastic work coming forward in all our life science sector on drugs like for Alzheimer's, and absolutely a core part of reforming the health service has to be bringing these drugs quicker and more easily to patients at the front line, because ultimately these diseases, as well as being terrible for patients, do cost the system an awful lot of money, and that's exactly where we want to go upstream in the system to make more efficiencies at the front line.
Yesterday your colleague Steve Reed told us that the BBC is not exceptionally biased, but as with all organisations, there can be on occasion. What do you think?
Well, we think the BBC is one of the most trusted news services in this country, and it's absolutely right that they are held to a high standard, and that's something that we think does happen and should continue to happen.
Yeah, but my question is, do you think they're biased on occasion?
No, I don't think the BBC are biased. I think they are held to a high standard. They are trusted by the British public and across the world, and that's something as an institution we should continue to hold in great value.
As indeed is Sky News, actually.
Indeed.
OK.
It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you. One of the things we want to talk to Wilfred about this morning is Oscar nominations. Hi, Wilf. Good morning to you. Have you seen the main players?
Well, yeah, I've seen some of them. Oscar nomination or beautiful golden men nominations, if these were the words of Cher, which I enjoyed you picking up on that earlier. So I've seen some of them, and at 1:30, as you say, we'll get the noms as they narrow it down to 4 or 5, and Jane and Kamali will have that from the likes of Oppenheimer, Barbie, Killer of the Flower Moon, Bradley Cooper, Paul Giamatti, Margot Robbie, Emma Stone. All of the big names are out there, and we're looking forward to seeing that narrowed down to those final 5 or 6. My question, Kay, to you is, when you see something get nominated or even win an Oscar, does it make you more or less likely to then go and see the film? I'm being a bit silly here, but they're always quite artsy, aren't they, rather than the big epics?
OK. I've not seen Oppenheimer, I have to say. If you were having to choose between Oppenheimer and Barbie, which is yours?
Well, I've seen both. I enjoyed both. Definitely preferred Oppenheimer, as it happens. But no, I thought both were very good. I thought Killers of the Flower Moon, which everyone raves about, was really dull and very, very long. So that's kind of my point with some of these nominations. But anyway, we'll have that at 1:30 with Jane. And by the way, more important note, Post Office inquiry begins again live at 10.
OK, lovely. For now, Will, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Another storm coming our way.
I know, another one.
Tell me more.
Yep, it's heading this way. We're going to see the wind strengthening today. Storm Jocelyn could see gusts widely 55 to 65 miles per hour. And
so not as bad?
No, so that is the one thing. So not quite as severe as the storm we saw earlier in the week. So yes, that is one blessing. But yes, could still bring some impacts, disruption to travel.
What you need is a warm, hearty Yorkshire pudding.
Oh my goodness, definitely. Who doesn't love a Yorkshire pudding?
I couldn't agree more. And look at this one. Apparently, it's the size of a toddler.
Oh my goodness, wow.
And some people are driving for, there you go, driving for up to 6 hours return journey. It's filled with a Cumberland sausage or slow braised beef, mash, seasonal vegetables and lots of gravy.
Yes, please.
Yeah, that's two. What about you?
I mean, it looks amazing. I think all I'd want is Yorkshire pudding. I don't think that you need the stuff inside it as well.
Oh, no, you've got to have a bit of braised beef or a Cumberland sausage.
100%. You know, traditionally they were served before the roast, so it was to fill you up with cheap food, wasn't it, before you then had the expensive meat. I think in the north they'd have them with jam as kind of a first course.
Well, you certainly wouldn't in Wigan.
Oh, well, if you're on the right county, then you would.
The only good thing out of Yorkshire is the M62.
I'm not going there. The War of the Roses ended a long time ago.
They were in Hertfordshire, weren't they? Hertfordshire.
Yes. Yeah, but he's from Yorkshire originally. He's from Yorkshire originally. Allowed. And I did have a look at how you... looking at Jamie's recipe last night. Apparently, the trick is to have very, very hot fat. And as a result, you can't use olive oil. You have to use vegetable or sunflower oil.
Okay. And don't open the oven door.
No, and we know that in Lancashire. We're back in just a few moments' time to tell you more about Yorkshire puddings and how to make a good one. Apparently, you have to rest the batter for 15 minutes as well. Anything to say for yourself?
No, I'm going to start a cooking show, though.
Yeah, I might do the same. Coming up in just a few moments' time, what on earth has happened overnight with the Houthis? We'll tell you in a sec. Stay tuned. everybody. Very good morning. It is 8 o'clock. On today's programme, developments from the Middle East overnight, with the Israeli army reporting what it calls the deadliest attack on its troops since the war began. Amanda.
And Foreign Secretary Lord Cameron defends UK strikes on Houthi rebels in Yemen, calling the actions of the rebel group unacceptable and illegal. He'll travel to the Middle East this week.
Yeah, and you've got...
Plus, we'll be rolling out the red carpet. Oscar nominations day, of course. We'll look ahead to the top picks at 9:45. Plus, at 9:20, joined by the guest who prides himself on making Yorkshire puddings the size of a toddler.
It's Tuesday, the 23rd of January.
The Israeli army has announced this morning that 21 of its soldiers were killed in a single incident yesterday in the Gaza Strip.
As the Defence Secretary says, fresh UK-US strikes against Houthi targets in Yemen overnight were self-defence. Could a new blood test revolutionise diagnoses for people with suspected Alzheimer's? After Isha, now comes Jocelyn, as a second storm bears down on the UK and Ireland today. Bankrupt councils, a special report from our People and Politics correspondent about the communities fighting to keep hold of their properties.
What's your message to the council if it starts to eye up your nice little building here?
Well, keep your hands off, really.
And the government minister tells this programme BBC Comedy News Quiz is an example of bias at the corporation.
Despite the fact that I've always been a big supporter of the BBC, that struck me as completely biased.
OK, you understand that a news quiz is comedy and nothing to do with actual news. Good morning. Thanks for joining us on The Breakfast Show. We begin with news from the Middle East, and Israel's military says 21 Israeli soldiers have been killed during intense fighting in Gaza. The figure marks the highest number of Israeli soldiers killed in a single day since fighting began following the 7th of October attacks. The IDF spokesperson Daniel Hagari said militants had fired a rocket-propelled grenade at a tank.
According to what we know at this point, around 4 p.m, an RPG missile was apparently fired by terrorists at a tank that secured the force, and at the same time, an explosion occurred in two two-story buildings. The buildings collapsed as a result of this explosion at a time when most of the force was within it.
Alistair joining us now. Biggest death toll since the start of this war. Alistair, good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, understandably, of course, the focus has largely been on the extremely high death toll amongst Palestinians in Gaza. Over
He had as I say, an ex-policeman. Nobody believed him, and I just wish somebody had just listened to him and said, "This." I mean, it was obvious he wasn't guilty.
Absolute scandal of our time, wasn't it, that? Talk to me about what's going on with councils running out of money.
Councils are in a lot of trouble. There's huge money trouble. Well, partly of their own doing. There's a lot of evidence suggests a lot of councils have been financially mismanaging their money. Birmingham's an example. We'll see that in a second. But a lot of councils are sort of pressing the emergency button saying, next year we do not have enough money to provide the services that we want. They're effectively declaring themselves bankrupt. And when that happens, they start eyeing up their assets. Because remember, councils are big landowners. So we've been to Birmingham, which effectively declared itself bankrupt a couple of months ago, partially because of a really bad IT system. Another reason was a huge equal pay scandal that they went through. And we've been talking to the communities who are trying to protect their community centres, their parks, who are saying, get your hands off our community projects. It's not our fault you're in such a financial mess.
Here we go.
It's tea and social afternoon in the Sons of Rest Community Centre in the middle of Handsworth Park in Birmingham. But this council building and hundreds of other places like parks, libraries and landmarks could be sold off to make money because the council is effectively bankrupt.
This is a jewel in the crown, this place. It contributes to social cohesion. If you ever want an example of a multiracial society which is under a lot of pressure at the moment working, look at this one. You get rid of this, where do we go?
The community is now using the law to register places like this as assets of community value to make it harder for the council to sell them.
What's your message to the council if it starts to eye up your nice little building here?
Well, keep your hands off, really, because this is a community place, you know, it's a valuable community place. And the message is not just to the council, but it's to central government and whoever comes in, is that, you know, resources should be properly resourced.
One by one, it appears councils in England are going bust. In July 2021, Slough Council issued what's called a Section 114 notice, effectively declaring itself bankrupt. More followed: Croydon, Woking, Thurrock, then Birmingham, and more recently Nottingham. Others are warning the same could happen to them, including Stoke-on-Trent, Middlesbrough, Somerset, Bradford and Cheshire East. Birmingham City Council told us it'll work with the community as it faces unprecedented financial challenges.
So what are their options here? Well, they could start to raise local taxes or cut services, or as the biggest landowner around here, they're already starting to sell off property. It's a bit like that stage in Monopoly when you've run out of money and your only option left is to get rid of your assets.
The future looks bleak. The local government association says 1 in 5 councils in England think they could go into effective bankruptcy this year or next. And that's bad news for the communities caught in the middle.
As we were watching this piece, you were telling me that you did a story similar to this 30-odd years ago.
Yeah, on my local newspaper, yeah. Council declared itself in a slightly different way, but effectively bankrupt. Yeah, 1995, so nothing changes, does it?
Yeah, and more about this online, and there's a longer version as well that we can see at skynews.com. All you need to do is scan the QR code for more. There you go, scan the QR code for more. Quick look at the weather. There you go. What's happening here? Well, we are hearing that Storm Jocelyn, which is the 10th named storm of the season, is likely to hit us not as widely as we saw from Storm Isha, but likely to hit about 6, 7 o'clock tonight. And once again, big problems in Scotland.
Yes, that's where the amber warning is in place this evening and overnight across northern and western Scotland. That's where we could see 80-mile-per-hour gusts, but like you were just saying, not quite as strong as Storm Isha we saw on Sunday night, but still probably going to bring some impacts. You know, people are still recovering, you know, there's trees down still, power outages, so it's not good news with another storm following. But yes, a widespread yellow warning as well across much of the UK. So strong winds for most of
Why
us.
are we having all these storms? I was looking at some of the others. It's we're already on the 10th named storm.
Yep.
Next we've got Kathleen, Lillian, Minnie,
Yep.
Nicholas. On it goes.
Yep, on it goes. And yeah, we're not even into February yet, so it's possible that we might get to some of those. Basically, we've got the jet stream, and it's across the Atlantic, it's across us, and it's just bringing those low pressure systems with it. And unfortunately, you know, at the moment we've got quite a strong jet stream, and it's just strengthening those low pressure systems, so bringing really strong winds and some heavy rain as well. So we need that jet stream to move away and bring high pressure back in, and then back to the cold blue skies and sunshine would be nice, wouldn't it?
It would actually. We didn't like it at the time, but now we want
I
it
know,
back
now
again.
we want it back, yes.
Okay, and that's from this evening?
Yes, so the amber warning is in place from this evening through till tomorrow morning, but the yellow warnings are in from this afternoon. And people will notice it's the rain that's moving in first. So the rain will move in, but the winds, strong winds are after the rain. So don't be fooled that the rain moves in and it's not too windy.
OK, let's have a look at that in more detail. Thanks very much.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, Storm Jocelyn will bring further wet and windy conditions, as we were hearing, but won't be as severe as Storm Isha. Although quieter from the middle of the week, the weather will remain unsettled. There's an amber wind warning for northern and western Scotland, valid from this evening. A yellow wind warning covers a wider area, while rain warnings are in place for parts of the northwest. Mostly dry, but rather cloudy start for eastern areas, with a touch of frost in places.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Let's take you stateside, where voters in New Hampshire are preparing to cast their ballots to choose this year's Republican presidential candidate. But given the indictment stacked against him, why are people still voting for Donald Trump? Let's get more with Mark Stone.
It's a week since Donald Trump stormed to victory in Iowa. His road back to the White House a little clearer. But why? How is a man so divisive, so polarizing, so surrounded by chaos, so popular still? An auction in Kansas. It draws ranchers and their cattle from across the state. This is a conservative heartland, yes, but the nostalgia for Donald Trump in particular is everywhere here.
I think Trump will change things around if he gets back in. I really do. I think it's going to get our border closed up, get things back to normal.
The economy is booming here in the Midwest. It is the all-American good life. The drawback to Trump seems to be as much about deep flaws they see on the other side.
When Trump was in office, it was a lot more steady. We're just on a roller coaster with Biden as far as what happens with our markets.
What about Trump the man? I mean, he's pretty unique.
He annoys me.
Why?
I think he needs to learn to keep his mouth shut on something.
But then a moment that cuts to the heart of a divide that's set so deep. What do you think the attraction of Trump is? Because he seems to still have such a hold on the country.
Absolutely nothing to me because me personally, I am engaged to a woman, so it's not a really safe thing around here to just outwardly express. I am currently searching for a state to live in and have a safe future. So that's something really real that I have to think about that a lot of people don't.
204, now 5, now a bit another 5, a bit another 6 here, a bit another now 7, a bit another.
What do you think about the two people that appear to be the front runners to be president?
I don't know why the Democrats and Republicans can't come up with younger candidates or candidates that don't have any baggage, but we're going to vote with who our nominees are.
And for you, that means Trump's the man.
Absolutely.
And so in a polarized nation, they'll choose who they're offered. And here, in the middle of America, beyond the extreme loyalists, the draw is back to Trump. Mark Stone, Sky News in Kansas.
Siobhan's here to talk to us about Norman Jewison. Now, initially you might think he's not a household name, but so many people will know his work.
so many films and theatre productions that you may not even realise were produced and directed by him. We're talking about Heat of the Night, Jesus Christ Superstar, that rock opera, Moonstruck.
Quite an eclectic mix there.
Yes, exactly. And what I thought was interesting anyway, reading about his life, is how his own personal experiences had helped to inform him and his creativity. I know that earlier we played a shot of Heat of the Night, which starred Sidney Poitier. Now, that was a film that he spoke about, and how it was inspired actually by his travels through the South in America when they were going through sort of Jim Crow segregation. He experienced that firsthand and said that that helped to inform him when he was making some of the dramas that now we all know and are aware of. So he did die at the age of 97. His publicist says that he died peacefully at home, and that there will be tributes to his life both in LA and in Toronto at some point later this year.
And he has a cupboard full of gongs, doesn't he?
Yes, that's right. And even Cher says that she had to credit him for winning a world herself in Moonstruck, which was that famous comedy.
Yeah, in fact, I think we've got a grab from her. Thanks very much indeed. Thanks a lot. This is what she said. She led the tributes. Farewell, sweet prince. Thank you for one of the greatest, happiest, most fun experiences of my life. Without you, I would not have my beautiful golden man. She's talking about her Oscar, of course. She won it for Loretta Castorini in the 1988 movie. Now let's talk about medics in the UK expected to be told they should not report suspected cases of illegal abortion to the police. Why? Let's speak to Dr. Sonia. She's going to tell us more about it. Hi, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us on the programme, Doctor. Health workers being told not to report women who they think have had an illegal abortion. Is that the right decision?
Yeah, absolutely. This guidance is really welcome. So this guidance emphasises that the importance of when healthcare professionals, it's their duty to support women and their duty of confidentiality. And there's been a worrying increase in referrals of women recently. 2 prosecutions by healthcare professionals. Last year, 6 women were taken to court. 1 woman was imprisoned. And this year, we know a further 4 women are going to be facing trial for suspected illegal abortions.
Life in prison, couldn't they? I mean, in theory.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people maybe don't realise in this country that abortion remains a criminal offence under law dating back to the 1800s, where with a maximum prison sentence of carrying a maximum sentence of life imprisonment if you're to have a legal abortion, which, to be honest, I think is completely wrong. We need to be updating that. Now, you can be protected from prosecution if you have an abortion under certain circumstances. So if 2 doctors were to agree for you to have an abortion, and if it was to happen under a certain premises. So if you were having an abortion outside of those circumstances, so let's say 2 doctors weren't to agree, let's say you were to order abortion pills online, then you're at risk of being prosecuted.
Are you not worried about illegal backstreet abortions?
So there may be situations when a woman, let's say for maybe in very difficult circumstances, a woman that's maybe very young, a woman that's in an abusive situation, that may, let's say, order abortion pills online. Now, in those cases, I don't think the woman should be criminalised and be sent to prison. I think that women should be supported and be cared for. So that's why, as healthcare professionals, we're calling for the decriminalisation of abortion in this country. No woman should be sent to jail for ending her own pregnancy. And in those very difficult situations where women may be choosing to end their pregnancy, we need to be making sure that we're supporting those women and caring for those women, not criminalising them.
OK, so in what way should we be looking to try to support the women? As you say, nobody is going to go through an illegal abortion by choice. What should we do to help them?
Yeah, so what this guidance says is, as healthcare professionals, if any woman comes to you, you need to be supporting her, you need to be respecting confidentiality, and you need to be giving her advice. This guidance has had to come out, though, due to problems that we have with the law. So the law impacts how, as healthcare professionals, we can provide abortion care in this country. So what really needs to happen is that abortion needs to be decriminalised in this country so that we're able to support women and we're able to provide abortion care just like we do all other forms of healthcare. There's no other form of healthcare in this country where you'd have to have 2 doctors to agree for something to be happening. So the law that we have in this country is, quite paternalistic, and it's outdated with modern medicine. medicine, but also outdated with modern society and our views on women in this country.
I remember from one of the dusty corners of my mind that when I interviewed Rishi Sunak before he became Prime Minister, and as part of our research, he had always dodged the issue when it came to voting on illegal abortions or otherwise. So you're not going to get much support at Downing Street. Who else can you turn to?
Well, the majority of the public are pro-choice. The majority of the public believe in a woman's right to choose whether or not she wants to continue her pregnancy. And I think the vast, vast majority of public do not believe that women should be sent to jail if they're choosing to end their pregnancies. So, you know, if politicians are not wanting to change legislation, they really are out of step with public opinion. I think in a modern society, most of us believe that it's a woman's right to choose whether or not she wants to continue or end her pregnancy. And no woman
at any period in that pregnancy?
So the vast, vast, vast majority of abortions happen at early stages. Now, 98% of abortions happen before 18 weeks, 90% happen before 10 weeks. The abortions that happen at later gestation tend to be difficult circumstances, can be for fetal abnormalities, or sometimes occasionally if a woman's in very difficult or complex situations, whether that's abuse or for someone's very young, or as other health issues going on. So in those cases, again, we shouldn't be criminalising those women. We shouldn't be turning them into criminals. We should be supporting those women to do what's best for them and for their health. Abortion is a very safe procedure. 1 in 3 women at some point in their lifetime will have an abortion. It's safer than childbirth, so we need to be supporting women to make the best decisions for them.
OK, it's good to see you, Doctor. Thank you. Much appreciated. Thank you. Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you, why millions of Britons would have to double their income to escape poverty. You'll hear from an expert on how to evade a poverty crisis. We'll be discussing the Culture Secretary's comments on the BBC and get analysis from 2 industry experts. Plus, how far would you drive to sample these giant Yorkshire puddings? We'll be discussing why people are travelling far and wide with its creator.
United Kingdom.
These last few years have seen some huge stories. And these stories have been driven by politics, by politicians, the people in power.
You must stay at home.
And it's my job to figure out how these decisions made by politicians impact all of us in our everyday lives.
This is the worst thing I've ever been through in my life.
People turn up here with their child stuff in a black sack and just say, I don't want to.
And that is what it is. It's first-class poverty.
Is this an example of the welfare state failing?
We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
These are stories that affect us all. Millions of children are now having to catch up. Some stories have changed all of our lives. Because like the residents, the staff are being infected. Politicians, they make decisions all of the time, and it's our job to hold them to account. I wonder if you will take this opportunity to apologise to those families. But in the end, the real power doesn't actually lie with the politicians. The real power lies with the people. I'm Nick Martin. I'm the People and Politics correspondent at Sky News.
again, everybody. You are watching The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. Yesterday, there was a bit of a contretemps about the BBC here on the programme that went viral. We'll be talking about that in more detail with two contributors in just a sec.
We certainly will, but let's bring you our top stories this morning. The Defence Secretary has said a fresh round of UK and US airstrikes against Houthi targets in Yemen were in self-defence. It's the second time British forces have taken part in strikes on the Iran-backed militants in response to attacks on Red Sea ships. That's as the Israeli military says at least 21 of its soldiers have been killed in Gaza in the deadliest attack since the war began. A new blood test could change the way Alzheimer's is diagnosed, with the disease detected 15 years before symptoms. Trials found the test to be at least as accurate as current diagnosis options in detecting signs. The UK and Ireland are braced for more bad weather as Storm Jocelyn, the second named storm in as many days, hits the British Isles. And campaigners in Birmingham have launched action to keep council-run properties open. It's over fears community centres, parks and libraries could soon close to help fund the council's £87 million debts.
Now, let's remind you what happened yesterday when the government minister was on the programme and I asked her whether she thought the BBC was biased. Do you think the BBC is biased?
Well, I am looking at this from the point of view of the Culture Secretary.
Yeah,
and
that's why I'm asking you.
And,
so do you think they're biased?
And the evidence shows that there is a perception of bias. The evidence of bias is what audiences believe is the content of the BBC and
but that's
how
perception,
they...
that's not evidence. That's perception.
That is evidence. That is evidence. Impartiality is about perception of the things that are being broadcast by the BBC.
Didn't he, and defend the fact that he didn't think the BBC was biased particularly?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's a bit of a tightrope, isn't it, really, when you've got Rishi Sunak stepping in as well. I mean, clearly, I think it looks like all of the Tory ministers are sort of jumping a little bit on this bandwagon of bashing the BBC without trying to go too far, not giving that many specific examples or talking about comedy or so on. But at the same time, it's a bit of a gift for Labour, because yesterday they were already talking about the culture wars and the Tories knocking the National Trust and RNLI, and then they said, oh, look, and you're knocking the BBC as well.
Yeah, no, the minister this morning had 24 hours to figure out what he was going to say. Huw Merriman, I thought he might have talked about Gary Lineker's tweets and, you know, what he's been saying, comparing the government to the Nazi Germany. I thought he might have talked about Hamas and the fact that they didn't call it a terrorist group, and they chose not to do that as part of the BBC guidelines. No, he said this. Is the BBC biased?
Well, I used to chair the all-party parliamentary group for the BBC, so I've always been a friend of the BBC. But let me give you an example. I know that you were searching for them yesterday. I was listening to the news quiz, which is on Radio 4 at 6:30 on Friday. I was driving from my constituency office to the home. For 10 minutes, all I heard, and it's satirical, it was just diatribe against Conservatives, not the government. And I did listen to that and think, for goodness sake, where is the balance in that? So, yes, I'm afraid to say, despite the fact that I've always been a big supporter of the BBC, that struck me as completely biased.
OK, you understand that a news quiz is comedy and nothing to do with actual news?
There was nothing in that 10 minutes that was remotely...
But you do understand that it's not
Of course, look, I would be the first one. I love it when
It's like
politicians
a
get
quiz.
lampooned, but that was the whole point. There wasn't actually anything in it, in that particular regard, which struck me as being sort of amusing. It was actually just more the drive. It may not be the news quiz, but it was 6:30 on a Friday, and as I say, it didn't strike me as being particularly satirical. It was just people standing up.
So you do think they're biased?
Well, that was just look. Listen to the first 10 minutes. I challenge any of your audience to it.
Do you think BBC News
is totally biased.
That upset you, didn't it?
It did upset me again. And again, you can listen to the minister, and he says he didn't find it funny. Well, we're back to the perception thing again, aren't we? Coming back to that concept of perception rather than facts. And I think also more broadly, the BBC in this country sets a standard because it's answerable to the licence fee payer, because the public are funding it through the licence fee, the government then diverts that money to the BBC. It sets a standard for broadcasting in general. In other countries who do not have such a robust state broadcaster, have a far lower quality of broadcasting across the board. The BBC sets a standard. We have to try and compete against that. So do other broadcasters. So I think more generally, if you attack the BBC, you slowly chip away at the standard of news broadcasting across the board?
You know what I find funny? BBC hospitality. This is what Labour said this morning.
We think the BBC is one of the most trusted news services in this country, and it's absolutely right that they are held to a high standard, and that's something that we think does happen and should continue to happen.
Yeah, but my question is, do you think they're biased on occasion?
No, I don't think the BBC are biased. I think they are held to a high standard. They are trusted by the British public and across the world, and that's something, as an institution, we should continue to hold in great value.
Let's bring in Professor Tim Lockhurst now. Hi, Tim used to work for the BBC, of course, now at Durham, head of South College, Durham. Hi, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us on the programme. Do you think the BBC has an impartiality problem?
No, I don't think the BBC has an impartiality problem. I think that the BBC will scrutinise a Labour government as forensically as it's currently scrutinising Conservative government. If that's the outcome of the general election we're expecting later this year, then the Labour Party can expect similar levels of scrutiny. So is the BBC institutionally biased? Well, when I worked for the BBC, the adage was that if we were being attacked by both left and right, then we were probably getting it absolutely right and we're going bang down the middle. So I think that the BBC is not institutionally biased. However, I do think there's a case for external scrutiny of BBC content, because I think that would serve the BBC's interests.
Yeah, and by saying that, you're referring to Ofcom, perhaps, coming under the banner of Ofcom, which other broadcasters have to abide by at the moment.
Yes, and I think that that's becoming a rather obvious anomaly. The BBC is a great British cultural institution. It's a fantastic cultural export. I've always been very proud to have worked for it. And when you work abroad for the BBC, you know how seriously it's taken, particularly in places where people are aspiring to democracy and regard the BBC as a tribune of democracy. But the BBC is working in new circumstances. There is new competition. The media market is more complex than it's been at any time in the BBC's history. And external scrutiny by Ofcom, although there is some already, would actually give the BBC a defence of being able to say, look, we're not marking our own homework. We are not responsible for every aspect of our own regulation. We are independently scrutinised, and we can therefore say that we rely on that external scrutiny to make sure that we are maintaining the impartiality of which we are very proud. I think that would actually serve the BBC's interests.
Given that it's a state broadcaster, given that it's held to account around the world with lots of different services that they provide, should they be held to a higher standard than other broadcasters?
Well, they're not a state broadcaster, they're a public broadcaster. I think this is always an important distinction to make. The BBC
so you ask, I suppose.
Yeah, the BBC is funded by the British public. Yes, the BBC needs to be held to a very high standard. The range of services it provides across radio, television, and of course a colossal service online is unparalleled in the UK by any other broadcaster. It is also unparalleled around the world as a cultural presence throughout the democratic world, and increasingly in states where democracy is not allowed and where it's listened to by people who are aspiring to democracy. So, of course, it must be held to the very highest standard. I think that those who work for the BBC and who aspire to work for the BBC know that the BBC faces that scrutiny. It is always under intense scrutiny. And for that reason, it needs the defence of being able to say, look, we know that we are being watched carefully. We know that we have to maintain the highest possible standards. And therefore, we welcome external scrutiny by Ofcom, because that external scrutiny is the independent arbiter which allows us to say, look, it's not us saying we're impartial, it is others who we can trust who are saying that we're impartial. That's a very valuable asset. External independent scrutiny is always a valuable way of checking internal consistency and internal adherence to rules.
Professor Lockhurst, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Alan Rossbridger, former editor-in-chief of The Guardian, editor of Prospect magazine, also joining us this morning. Good to see you. Thanks very much for joining us, Alan. Does the BBC, though, as the Culture Secretary told me yesterday, have a problem with the perception of bias?
Well, I'm not surprised you tied her up in knots yesterday, because she couldn't answer. But I've read the report, the midterm review, And there's very little there that really pins this question of bias on the BBC. Tim Luckhurst was talking about external scrutiny from Ofcom. I've gone back and read all the Ofcom reports on the BBC, and year after year, they broadly give the BBC a clean bill of health. So it's we can talk about perception. The obvious question is whose perception? And Lucy Fraser is, I think, the 8th culture secretary in 6 years. And the thought that she, any more than any of her colleagues, should be the arbiter of what is bias on the BBC is frankly ridiculous.
But I suppose if she had given me examples of potentially a very well-known sports presenter and the comparisons that he was making with the British government and Nazi Germany, or potentially the BBC not wanting to call Hamas a terror organisation, would that have been a more reasonable position from her?
That would have been a better answer. But again, with each of those, the BBC broadcasts 365 days of the year, round the clock, in multiple languages, in multiple places. So there are always going to be isolated incidents in which sometimes they make mistakes. And the one that she cited yesterday, the only thing she could cite yesterday, was the Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza. That was clearly a mistake. But to confuse a mistake or perception with bias is really, it's just sort of schoolboy stuff.
The Transport Minister, I don't know if you've heard him this morning, he's had 24 hours to think about it. He obviously knew I was going to ask him about it this morning. And he used an example of the news quiz on Radio 4, saying the 10 minutes, the top 10 minutes of the show was a diatribe against the government. Does he have a point?
Well, it's just not good enough for individual ministers to say this few minutes on one show showed bias. I mean, I listen to the news quiz, have done for years, and they ridicule all politicians. So if you want to make it overwhelmingly, it comes out in favour of the BBC and says it's doing its job. So, I think it's doing no favours to the BBC to have these arbitrary indicators of mistakes or things taken completely out of context, and to say we need more control of the BBC. I think the government has enough control of the BBC. And by the way, what about GB News, which they're supposed to be regulating, and which gets an almost free pass, which shows much more bias than the BBC, but for some reason this government doesn't want to do anything about them.
It's not just the Conservative government against, I mean, I don't know if we could widen it. It's not the Conservative government against the BBC. It's politicians against the press on many occasions. I mean, Tony Blair's government had a love-hate relationship with the BBC.
Yeah, and I think the Hutton inquiry into, again, what I think was a mistake by a reporter at 6 o'clock in the morning led to the toppling of the Director General and the Chairman.
Yeah.
And I think this obsession with the BBC and wanting, Tim Luckhurst rightly says it's not a state broadcaster, but I think a lot of politicians would like it to be a state broadcaster. And I think we really ought to back off and cherish a bit more that what we have in outstanding broadcasters in the BBC, Sky News and others, and not want to have this element of control.
It's good to talk to you, Alan. Thanks for taking the time. Hopefully you can come and join us again soon. Thanks.
Sure.
Still to come on The Breakfast Show, is the UK facing a poverty crisis? We'll hear why millions would need their income doubled to bring them above the poverty line.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
It's turning everybody into, a crazy, violent drug addict.
How are you feeling?
I am angry. Legal abortion!
It is an anti-woman agenda.
2 women say that you paid for their abortions. Are you a hypocrite, sir? Will your candidates win?
I hope so. I think they will. I think they're great candidates.
I gotta be realistic. My sister's dead.
More than 4 weeks on, there's no murder weapon and no suspect. Are you going to catch this killer?
We are doing everything we can.
Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded not guilty to all 6 charges against her. Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her.
You're so excited.
Severe nightmares of these people coming in and just taking me in the middle of the night.
I've watched as whole towns were torn apart by natural disaster.
I'm alive and I'm thankful for that, but there are a lot of people who aren't.
It's not the winds people fear most here, it's the water. We take you to the heart of the stories which shape our world.
Do you truly believe what you're saying?
A lot of cases that I know are reported from Ukrainian missiles themselves.
Ambassador, with respect, I think that's preposterous.
Hello again, everybody. You are watching The Breakfast Show here on Sky News Tuesday morning. Wilfred standing by for us. What's caught your eye today? You looking forward to the Oscar nominations?
Certainly are. So they're expected to cross, Kate, good morning, by the way, at 1:30. So Jane will have that and all the reaction as well with Kamali afterwards. It's always fun, isn't it, to see what is nominated. What I was kind of getting at and joking about earlier is it's almost like there needs to be just one extra category for the most epic movie or the most enjoyable to watch. Because often you don't actually see them tally with what does well in the box office, which kind of tells you something, doesn't it? It's more of a sort of inside look at what's best rather than the broader spectrum. But we'll be looking out lots of big names, of course, to see who gets the nominations.
Yeah, you were telling me in the last hour, for those who weren't with us, you've seen Barbie. What did you think?
Barbie, I enjoyed Barbie a lot. I didn't think it was the best movie I've ever seen, but it was very enjoyable. I thought Oppenheimer was excellent. Killer of the Flower Moons, I've now forgotten what it's called now, that one. Killer of the Flower Moons, I thought was rather boring and long. Should also just mention, by the way, we've got quite a lot of other live events. Tobias Elwood will be joining us to discuss the latest Middle East strikes. And we'll also be discussing a little bit of those latest public sector net borrowing figures and that little bit of extra headroom it gives the Chancellor for March 6th.
OK, look forward to it. Thank you. Let's talk in more detail. Greg is with us. Hi, Greg. Good to see you. About the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. They've come up with a survey that says that people would have to double their money and still be living in poverty. Terrible.
So poverty rates in the UK, so the Joseph Rowntree Foundation is a society that reports on poverty levels, among other things. Every year they produce this poverty report. And what's really striking for me, reading through this, is that actually poverty levels haven't changed very much for quite a long time, except in one group, which is the people in really deep poverty, which is to say families who are not only struggling to make ends meet, but would have, as you say, literally to double their incomes to be able to reach the breadline. Now, that is a stark finding. And unfortunately, my business now, so what we find when people do approach us who are in those more serious poverty situations, about half of families in poverty are in arrears as well. Which
How do
means
they find themselves in that position?
Well, there's all sorts of reasons why you might find yourself in that situation. You might struggle to find work. You might be a single-parent family. There's a very high proportion of single-parent families represented in the poverty statistics. But again, not only those situations, just people with kids. So 3 in 10 children in the UK are below that poverty line. But 1 in 5 adults, 3 in 10 children. So again, it's just when life takes more out of you than you have to give. And a lot of us have found ourselves in that situation during the cost of living crisis. The challenge for families in arrears, particularly in those deep poverty contexts, is that they often can't change providers of their services. They can't find a cheaper deal. They can't go move between one credit card and another. They're stuck where they are. And so it's particularly hard for families in those tough situations.
Let me ask you about mortgages, going on from that. The government considering 1% mortgages to help first-time buyers get onto the ladder. Good idea?
Well, we're going to see lots of this sort of, floating of ideas ahead of what is likely to be quite a political budget in March. So I wouldn't count any chickens yet.
OK.
The challenge with this sort of measure is that, yes, it would help first-time buyers, and goodness knows they're having a tough time getting onto the property ladder in many cases. Of course, the challenge also with that is it's going to end up fueling property price increases. So just at a time when we hope perhaps to see property prices flatten out, it might lead to another boom. If you own a property, that's good news. If you're a first-time buyer in 5 years' time and prices have risen further in the meantime, it's bad news. So it strikes me as being the danger is it's a short-term measure to sort of prop up first-time buyers currently in the market. I mean, a better answer surely would be to overhaul the planning system so that it's easier to build houses and we get more supply into the market.
And not on floodplains, hopefully. Any projections for the budget?
Well, I think we're probably going to see income tax cuts. Exactly what the form those takes, we're watching the headlines as the various balloons are floated over the next few weeks. I also think that the government's going to try to set out its stores. It's going to be a political budget because clearly there's going to be an election later this year, and both parties are tussling for hearts and minds of voters. What I'm particularly looking for, given where I'm sitting here, is measures to help consumers. We think we've seen not enough being done by this government to make sure that mobile phone companies aren't taking advantage of rising inflation, that broadband providers aren't taking advantage. And we'd also like to see more support with energy bills, because although they're coming down a bit, they're still almost twice the level they were 2 years ago, which is why services like mine exist.
Lots of times for us to chat between now and then. Good to see you as always. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Quick look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Storm Jocelyn will bring further wet and windy conditions, but won't be as severe as Storm Isha. Although quieter from the middle of the week, the weather will remain unsettled. There's an amber wind warning for northern and western Scotland, valid from this evening. A yellow wind warning covers a wider area, while rain warnings are in place for parts of the northwest.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
When is that weather going to be really bad?
So rain today, heavy rain today, and then the strongest winds will be this evening and overnight.
OK. And what we need is a good warming Yorkshire pudding.
We do, don't we?
Yeah, look at this. Flipping neck size of a toddler is what we're told. A foot long, 6 inches wide, and you have to go to Hertfordshire to get it.
You certainly do, although I'm just looking at the Guinness World Records. It's got a long way to go. The biggest ever Yorkshire pudding, an area of 46.46 metres squared.
Yeah, but what did it taste like?
I don't know. I've just seen a picture of a cement mixer being used to mix up the batter.
I can't imagine that's very nice. Apparently, the best way to get it to rise is to have extra hot fat.
Oh, there you go. It's a secret.
Yeah,
like
so
pancakes.
not olive oil, but you can use sunflower and vegetable. And the oven needs to be at what temperature? Do you know at home? What about you at the back? Yeah, we'll tell you in a sec. Hello everybody, very good morning. It's 9 o'clock on today's programme. Developments from the Middle East as the Israeli army reports what it calls the deadliest attack on its troops since the war began, Amanda.
And Foreign Secretary Lord Cameron defends UK strikes on Houthi rebels in Yemen, calling the actions of the group unacceptable and illegal. He'll travel to the Middle East this week.
And we'll be rolling out the red carpet because it's Oscars nominations day. We'll look ahead to the top picks at 9:45 and at 9:20, joined by our guest who prides himself on making a Yorkshire pudding the size of a toddler.
You want to watch that, don't you? Tuesday, 23rd of January.
The Israeli army has said this morning that 21 of its soldiers were killed yesterday in a single incident fighting in the Gaza Strip.
That, as the Defence Secretary says, fresh UK-US strikes against Houthi targets in Yemen overnight was self-defence. Could a new blood test revolutionise diagnoses for people with suspected Alzheimer's? After Isha, now comes Jocelyn as a second storm bears down on the UK and Ireland today. Bankrupt councils, a special report from our People and Politics correspondent about the communities fighting to keep hold of their properties.
What's your message to the council if it starts to eye up your nice little building here?
Well, keep your hands off, really.
And the government minister tells this programme BBC Comedy News Quiz is an example of bias at the corporation.
Despite the fact that I've always been a big supporter of the BBC, that struck me as completely biased.
OK, you understand that a news quiz is comedy and nothing to do with actual news?
No.
Good morning. Good morning and thanks for joining us here. On The Breakfast Show, Israel's military says 21 Israeli soldiers have been killed during intense fighting in Gaza. That's the highest number of Israeli soldiers killed in a single day since fighting began last October. Israel's Prime Minister called it one of the country's most difficult days since the war erupted. The IDF spokesperson Daniel Hagari said militants had fired a rocket-propelled grenade at a tank.
According to what we know at this point, around 4 p.m, an RPG missile was apparently fired by terrorists at a tank that secured the force, and at the same time, an explosion occurred in two two-story buildings. The buildings collapsed as a result of this explosion at a time when most of the force was within it.
Alistair joining us now from Jerusalem. Hello to you, Alistair. The death toll continuing to rise on both sides.
Yeah, it was the single worst loss of life in one day for the Israeli military since October the 8th. October the 7th, they lost a very high number fighting Hamas when Hamas terrorists came over the border. But yesterday's was the worst day for the Israeli military since they have been fighting inside Gaza. As you heard from Daniel Hagari there, laying out what happened in the incident, actually very close to the Gaza border in what's really known now as the buffer zone between Israel and Gaza. 190 Palestinians also killed in fighting in Gaza yesterday. We should note the fighting in and around the city of Khan Yunis, which is a major city in the south of Israel, is becoming particularly intense over the last 24 hours. The Israelis have said that they've encircled the city and they're starting to push in towards Hamas strongholds. And so thousands of Palestinian civilians are fleeing even further south as far as they can go towards Rafah. But a lot are being caught up in the heavy fighting as Israel pushes into Gaza's second city.
OK, for now, thank you. Well, Britain and the United States have carried out fresh airstrikes on Houthi targets in Yemen. Amanda is here with us. A short while ago, the Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, said the government will continue to back their words and warnings with action.
What the Houthis are doing is unacceptable, it's illegal, and it's threatening the freedom of navigation. That's why we've taken the action. Alongside that action is a whole set of measures we'll be taking, including sanctions and other pressure to put on the Houthis, combined, of course, with the action the Royal Navy is taking with others in the Red Sea. And we'll be building the strongest coalition of support to back the steps that we've been taking.
But what's interesting, Amanda, is whether, as happened last time, the government shared the fact that they were going to carry out this strike with the opposition.
Yeah, rather extraordinary row that's broken out this morning because, as you say, last time around, although Parliament weren't recalled, they didn't debate this in advance or have a vote on the previous attack. They don't actually have to in law. Sir Keir Starmer and the leader of the House, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, were called to Downing Street for an advance briefing about what was going to happen, and then Labour were indeed very supportive of the government's decision to take action to support shipping in the Red Sea, protect lives, global shipping and so on. This time around, however, number 10 sources have been telling us, well, they were briefed once again. We had the Minister Huw Merriman on earlier saying it was his understanding that they had been informed about what was happening in the same way as last time. Labour sources, however, saying that's not true, that they didn't have the similar kind of advanced briefing, and that really I think the feeling from them is they want to have one, they want to know why they didn't have one, and they're not going to find out more until later on, where they might get more of a briefing, and indeed we're expecting Government Minister or indeed the Prime Minister, as last time, to stand up in the House of Commons and give a statement. But considering that we had this kind of moment of cross-party consensus in the national interest last time, this row this morning just seems a very odd way of handling it and doesn't seem likely to add to that kind of sense of consensus going forward. OK, for now, let's wait and see how that develops. As you say, a developing row there. Let's talk about Alzheimer's. So a great story in some of the papers this morning saying a blood test which can detect symptoms up to 15 years before.
Yes, and massively accurate and really pertinent, isn't it? Because the stats here from the NHS, 1 in 14 of us in the UK over the age of 65 will have Alzheimer's, 1 in 6 of us over the age of 80 will as well. So an ever-increasing issue for the health service and thus society, as well as we also age as a society. So potentially, if we can identify and allow people then to try and make as many corrections to their lifestyle as possible and live a healthier, longer life, fantastic. Yeah,
apparently symptoms generally show, Thomas, after the age of 60. Genetics do play a role, diet as well, but on the face of it, this is really good news.
Yeah, definitely. And a general rule of thumb is that what's good for the heart is also good for the brain. So there's a good marker of how the kind of lifestyle you should be leading if you want to reduce the risks of Alzheimer's. But detecting it in early really is important. At the moment, the NHS doesn't have either the machines or the staff to do that. And that's why this blood test could be so significant, that it can do the diagnosis at scale. There are hundreds of thousands of people who would need it. And there are drugs coming down the line now that are being shown for the first time to be extremely effective at slowing the progress of memory and cognitive brain problems and so on. But they need to be given at a very early stage of the disease, and that's where this blood test could be really significant. Now, it needs to be validated in bigger studies, in a more diverse population. But if it is, then doctors are hopeful that this could be given to everyone over the age of 50 on a regular basis, allowing them to get access to these drugs and turn the tide on a dreadful disease.
OK, for now, thanks so much indeed. Thanks a lot. Apparently, giving up sugar, checking your blood pressure, check your weight, no smoking, no drinking. You'll be right as rain.
Live a healthy lifestyle. A little bit of everything in moderation, hey?
There you go, that's what they say.
Let's bring you some of the morning's top stories now and prepare for more bad weather. Thousands of households still without power. The UK and Ireland are braced for yet another storm. After Storm Isha, now Storm Jocelyn is bearing down. Amelia Harper has this report.
Storm Isha in full force in Brighton, and there's more to come. Another storm is following swiftly today. Jocelyn, expected to hit Scotland the hardest. 2 men died in car accidents involving fallen trees here in Fife in Scotland and in Northern Ireland. Isha hit most parts of the UK with wind speeds of up to 90 miles an hour, and yet some still took a chance. In Lincolnshire, another close call when this roof was ripped from a house. As planes struggled to touch down, landing became a lottery. Passengers watched from the inside at aborted landings. This Lufthansa flight was seconds from Dublin Airport when the pilot was forced to go all the way back to Munich. Go on. And there could be more to come. The 10th named storm in 5 months is on its way.
Storm Isha could have, caused some problems weakened structures, weakened trees that may then come down as a result of Storm Jocelyn. So although Storm Jocelyn isn't as intense, there is a higher chance than usual that this storm could cause some disruption because it's following so closely after a previous storm.
Parts of the UK are only just recovering from one weather event, and with a second battering in less than 48 hours, it can only mean more disruption and a danger to life once again. Amelia Harper, Sky News.
A gunman who was on the run for allegedly killing 8 people in Illinois is believed to have fatally shot himself after a confrontation with officers. Police have launched a manhunt for 23-year-old Romeo Nance after he was suspected of shooting dead 8 people at 3 locations in Chicago. Donald Trump has taken aim at his last remaining rival for the Republican nomination to become US president. It's now a 2-horse race, and the pair will be hoping to win over the state of New Hampshire today in the latest primary.
So if you want a losing candidate who puts America last, vote for Nikki Haley. But if you want a president who puts America first every single time, you're going to vote for Donald J. Trump, and you have to get out and vote.
The House of Lords has defied Rishi Sunak by voting against the ratification of the UK's new treaty with Rwanda. Peers backed a motion to delay the controversial deportation agreement until the government can prove the country is safe. The treaty is separate to the Rwanda Safety Bill, which will be debated in the Lords next week.
Local authorities in the UK coming under increasing financial strain, with more and more declaring themselves bankrupt. Why? Good morning.
Yeah, one by one, Kay, councils are declaring major financial emergencies, effectively bankruptcy, saying that in the year to come they do not have enough money to provide basic services. We've been to Birmingham, a council that has declared itself effectively bankrupt. Remember, this is the biggest local authority in Europe.
Didn't know that.
It's now got its eyes on its assets to sell them off, and we've been speaking to the communities who are saying, keep your hands off our community assets.
It's tea and social afternoon in the Sons of Rest Community Centre in the middle of Handsworth Park in Birmingham. But this council building and hundreds of other places like parks, libraries and landmarks could be sold off to make money because the council is effectively bankrupt.
This is a jewel in the crown, this place. It contributes to social cohesion. If you ever want an example of a multiracial society which is under a lot of pressure at the moment working, look at this one. You get rid of this, where do we go?
The community is now using the law to register places like this as assets of community value to make it harder for the council to sell them.
What's your message to the council if it starts to eye up your nice little building here?
Well, keep your hands off, really, because this is a community place, you know, it's a valuable community place. And the message is not just to the council, but it's to central government and whoever comes in, is that, you know, resources should be properly resourced.
One by one, it appears councils in England are going bust. In July 2021, Slough Council issued what's called a Section 114 notice, effectively declaring itself bankrupt. More followed: Croydon, Woking, Thurrock, then Birmingham, and more recently Nottingham. Others are warning the same could happen to them, including Stoke-on-Trent, Middlesbrough, Somerset, Bradford and Cheshire East. Birmingham City Council told us it'll work with the community as it faces unprecedented financial challenges.
So what are their options here? Well, they could start to raise local taxes or cut services, or as the biggest landowner around here, they're already starting to sell off property. It's a bit like that stage in Monopoly when you've run out of money and your only option left is to get rid of your assets.
The future looks bleak. The local government association says 1 in 5 councils in England think they could go into effective bankruptcy this year or next. And that's bad news for the communities caught in the middle.
Biggest in Europe, I didn't know that. Interesting fact. So tell me more about where we can see more on this.
We've got lots online. We've got a slightly longer piece running today. And these are kind of David and Goliath battles. I know it's a bit of a cliche, but communities very keen to keep their parks, their libraries, their historic buildings. And Birmingham Council is a huge landowner, and it's said that no assets are off the table at the moment. And so these campaigners are starting to use the law to kind of ring-fence their precious locations to try and stop the council from selling it off. And today, actually, council leaders are in Westminster right now about to meet local government minister Simon Hoare to say we effectively need more money. We can't continue like this.
OK, let's see what happens. I know you'll monitor it for us. For now, thanks very much indeed. Usually the QR code that we will put on the screen for you, and you can see more on that story. There you go. Meantime, let's get more on the latest storm to hit the UK. That's Storm Jocelyn. I know we were only talking about Storm Isha yesterday. Storm Jocelyn tonight. David Blevins is with us. Hi, David. You're wrapped up warm there in Portrush. What are you expecting? Good morning.
Well, Kay, we thought we would be in the calm between the storms right now, but there is very little respite here on the north coast of Northern Ireland. The rain has arrived and the wind is whipping up now as Storm Isha passes the baton to Storm Jocelyn, and that really will be a concern for engineers who are still battling to deal with the aftermath of Sunday night and Monday morning's weather. There are thousands of homes across the UK and Ireland still without power, and they're likely to be without electricity for some time yet. We're not expecting the wind to be just as strong today, but remember, it doesn't have to be, because lots of trees will have been loosened by the strength of the wind on Sunday night and Monday morning, and are much more vulnerable now to uprooting. And we know that fallen trees were the cause of 2 fatalities over the last 24 hours, one in Scotland and the other here in Northern Ireland. Just a reminder about the weather warnings. There's a yellow weather warning for rain and wind across most of the UK. It's an amber warning for wind on the west coast of Scotland, an orange warning for wind on the west coast of Ireland. So really, it's going to be another one of those evenings where, unless you have to leave home, then don't. This is Storm Jocelyn, as you say. That's the 10th storm of the season. I think it was 2016 when we last got to the letter J in the alphabet. And just to let you know, Jocelyn was named by the Irish Weather Service Met Éireann in honour of Dame Jocelyn Bell Burnell, an astrophysicist from my native county Armagh. We're very proud of her.
That's so annoying. I'd done all that research and I was just about to tell you all of that. 1967 came up with the first pulsating radio star.
That's absolutely right. And her father was the architect behind a planetarium also in my native county Armagh. So as I say, we're very proud of her blaze trailing. But I suppose on the other hand, we're not so proud to be the place where these storms making their way frequently across the Atlantic first make landfall.
It's great to see you, David. Oh, keep warm, please. Thanks very much. Joe is with us. Another storm within 24 hours. What on earth is going on?
I know, that jet stream's just bringing those storms our way, unfortunately. So, yes, another one on the way tonight. But the rest of the week's looking...
Not as bad?
Not as bad, no. It won't be as severe. And the strongest winds won't be as widespread as what we saw Sunday night and into Monday. So, yes, not as severe, but still, like we just heard there, you know, there's impacts, you know, loosened trees, things like that from the storm we've already had, you know, will bring some impact. So that's why there are weather warnings in place.
This is 10 and it's not even February.
I know, yeah, so we've still got some time to go yet, so possibility of more storms on the way. But you can see here, this is Storm Jocelyn moving in, and these are the wind gusts that we could see through tonight and into the early hours of tomorrow morning, strengthening potentially up to 80 miles per hour across northern and western parts of Scotland. That's where we'll probably see the strongest winds, but widely 55 to 65 miles per hour. And some heavy rain today as well, so rainfall amounts adding up. We could see 40 to 60 millimetres of rain.
I don't know what that is. How much is that?
I have to think. I always...
6 centimetres. So 6 centimetres is 5 into 12. Yeah, it's
so I'm always like 25 millimetres is 1 inch. That's how I remember
okay,
it, roughly.
Okay. So
anyway.
it's 2.5 inches,
yeah.
3 inches, something like
that.
So
yes, so yeah, quite a lot of rain, and we've had rain already from the recent storms, and yes, ground is saturated, so flooding will be an issue as well.
Thanks, Joe. Let's look at that in more detail.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
OK, here we go. Storm Jocelyn bringing further wet and windy conditions, but as we say, not as severe as Storm Isha. Although quieter from the middle of the week, the weather will remain unsettled. There's an amber wind warning for northern and western Scotland, valid from this evening, and a yellow wind warning covers a wider area.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you. We are going to be looking at some of the tributes being paid to the filmmaker Norman Jewison, who's died at the age of 97. More on that. Here's a question for you. How far would you drive to sample these giant Yorkshire puddings? We'll be discussing why people are travelling for hours with its creator next.
Kingdom.
These last few years have seen some huge stories. And these stories have been driven by politics, by politicians, the people in power.
You must stay at home.
And it's my job to figure out how these decisions made by politicians impact all of us in our everyday lives.
This is the worst thing I've ever been through in my life.
People turn up here with their child stuff in a black sack and just say, I don't want to.
And that is what it is. It's first-class poverty.
Is this an example of the welfare state failing?
We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
These are stories that affect us all. Millions of children are now having to catch up. Some stories have changed all of our lives. Because like the residents, the staff are being infected. Politicians, they make decisions all of the time, and it's our job to hold them to account. I wonder if you will take this opportunity to apologise to those families. But in the end, the real power doesn't actually lie with the politicians. The real power lies with the people. I'm Nick Martin. I'm the People and Politics correspondent at Sky News.
Again, everybody. Now, how far would you drive for one of these? Here they come, impressive Yorkshires. People have been travelling far and wide to the Bull's Head in Hertfordshire, who was serving up this 1 foot wide Yorkshire pudding. Saw it in the paper yesterday, had to speak to Chris about it, the manager of the Bull Pub, who makes these. And here he is. Hi, Chris.
Good morning.
Morning. Tell me, have you got any Yorkshires with you?
I've got one just here in front of me, my love.
Oh, look at the size of that. Described as being the size of a toddler, I was reading. Tell me how you make Yorkshire puddings that big and why you decided to do it in the first place.
Well, we've been doing them for years, to be fair. And we fill them with slow-braised beef brisket, toad in the oils, vegetarian toads, lamb shanks. Well, anything that will go in there with gravy, to be fair. But, yeah, the secret is a great mix. The oven's got to be set at 210 degrees. That's the way we tried and tested it. And we basically use a cake tin. And, well, they don't always come out perfect, but we try as best, if you understand what I mean.
How do you make sure you don't have a soggy bottom?
Oh, they do get a little soggy bottom sometimes, to be fair. It depends how big they are, if you know what I mean. But once you put the gravy in anyway, they're always going to get a soggy bottom, aren't they, love?
I've been a journalist for 45 years for this sort of conversation. Who's coming hours and hours to have one of these Yorkshires, and what do they have inside it?
I've had so many messages of people. I'm not sure if anybody's actually got here yet, but I've had people from Leeds, Bristol, you name it, everywhere, wanting to come and have them. To be fair, it's been a local dish for years because I've been here for 15 years, and there's so many people had them over the years. We used to have a pan in the pub, but we've got rid of that, and I used to say our famous toad in the oil. So, yeah, I'm actually overwhelmed with how many people have just been contacting us, and obviously social media has just gone a little bit crazy, to be fair.
OK, show me again and then explain to me how you managed to get them to rise so much. You say it's about the temperature of the oven.
We've tried, we've tried and tested it. We've tried it at 190 degrees, everything, but we found that 210 degrees is the perfect temperature.
And how long do you have to cook it for?
Sorry?
How long do you have to cook it for?
15 minutes.
Is that all? Well, and what do you put inside them?
Anything from lamb shank to slow braised beef brisket and Cumberland sausages. And don't forget the corn sausages for the vegetarians.
Yeah, any gravy?
Oh, lots of gravy, yeah.
Oh, thank goodness for that. How much do you charge?
They're $14.95.
Oh, it's quite expensive, isn't it?
Not for a not for a foot long toad in the oil full of everything you can want.
And do people manage to eat all the way through it? Or do they ask for a doggy bag and take it home?
Yeah, some people have takeaways because we have takeaway facility too, so yeah.
OK. Let me have one last look at it. Hold it up in front of your face before I let you go, just to give an idea of how big it is. There it is. Absolutely enormous. It's good to see you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
See ya. From Yorkshire puddings to haggis. Oh, yes. And the World Haggis Championships was won by Simon William Broadrib, but he is not Scottish. Simon, good to see you. Tell me about your haggis.
Oh, it's just made with lots of love, really.
What's it made of?
Say again?
What's it made of?
Oh, you don't want to know. You don't want to know what it's made of. It's all hearty and good quality ingredients. Ideal for the winter. But yeah, it's made of lots of offal and suet. It doesn't sound nice, but it does taste nice in the end.
OK, and do you use lamb's stomach for it? What do you do?
Yeah, so we use lamb's liver, lamb's hearts, lamb's lungs, and the casing is a beef intestine.
OK, now we can tell from your accent that you're not from Scotland, and yet you beat all the Scots, it's almost Burns night, to win the competition. What made your haggis stand apart from the rest, do you think?
Oh, it's a good question. I don't really know, really. I don't really know. I think it's nothing. What we use is very simple and very easy, but it is good quality ingredients. You know, we use the best. We buy in the best lamb and we buy in the best beef, and with that comes all the offal, which we use and we make a really nice stock. I suppose that's another good bit of information is we do use a really nice stock with all these basic ingredients we buy in, and it's all from local farms.
I heard you on the radio and I heard you say that it's a secret. There's a secret ingredient. One of your team knows how to make the first half. The other member of your team knows how to make the second half. Only you know the whole ingredients. Is that right?
I couldn't hear that. There's got a lot of background noise in here. They're all yabbering away over there. Sorry.
That's all right. I was saying, is it right to say that you're the only person that knows exactly what goes into this haggis?
What goes into it?
Yeah. Are you the only person who knows the whole recipe?
Yeah, I am the only person that knows the whole recipe. We have about 7 lads here, and there's 2 different lads, and one knows half the recipe, and the other half knows the other half. So, and they don't like each other, which is why I chose them. Yeah. So as long as they carry on hating each other, no one's going to know the whole recipe.
What do you say to the Scots who say, how can somebody from England know how to make haggis better than us?
I think maybe the Scots aren't, they're not like this, but they are known for being tight. And I think they try and, they try and make it cheaper than it really should be, And we don't try and make it cheaper. What we try and do, we try and make it the best quality. We want to give it to the customer and they enjoy it and they come back. And sometimes I think the Scots take, they take that the shortcut and maybe put some stuff in which isn't always the best quality. I know that's going to upset some people, but what we do, we try and get it so the customer comes back.
Yeah.
What is that I can hear, Simon? I think it's all the cars driving north of the border, south of the border to have a chat with you about that. It's good to talk to you. Good luck. Enjoy Burns Night. And go on.
Happy Haggis Day. Happy Burns Night.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Burns Night.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. 25th of January. Apparently, they're too tight in Scotland to make good haggis. Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you. Batten down the hatches. Another storm's on the way in the wake of destruction caused by Storm Isha. Plus... Hello again, everybody watching The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. Coming up, we're going to be talking a little bit more about the BBC, aren't we? And the government's getting its knickers in a twist over whether they're biased or not.
Yeah, I mean, ministers lining up really to come on this programme and to attempt to give you examples of bias. But as we had yesterday, it's not really clear if those really are examples of bias or not. I think that could be seen as a perception.
Can comedy be biased?
Sorry?
Can comedy be biased?
Well, it depends again on perception, because the minister didn't like it, so therefore he thought it was. But I also think, you know, go back to the days of the Labour Party, they will have lampooned the sale of the gold. I'm sure they will have lampooned education. You know, the boot's always on the other foot, isn't it, I think, in that respect.
So it all started yesterday with Lucy Fraser saying that the BBC was biased, and I asked her for examples. Do you think the BBC is biased?
Well, I am looking at this from the point of view of the Culture Secretary.
Yeah,
and
that's why I'm asking you.
And
so do you think they're biased?
And the evidence shows that there is a perception of bias. The evidence of bias is what audiences believe is the content of the BBC and
But that's
how
perception,
they...
that's not evidence. That's perception.
That is evidence. That is evidence. Impartiality is about perception of the things that are being broadcast by the BBC.
I know.
I mean, I think it's just giving a gift to Labour in a way, because yesterday their key message was the Tories are laying into these beloved institutions like the National Trust and the BBC in the name of the war on woke, and we don't think that's right. And then they presented another example on the plate. Saying they were...
And so the minister this morning obviously knew, I mean, it wasn't rocket science, he knew I was going to ask him about it, didn't he? And so he'd had 24 hours to think about it, and he came up with an example of BBC bias. Is the BBC biased?
Well, I used to chair the all-party parliamentary group for the BBC, so I've always been a friend of the BBC. But let me give you an example. I know that you were searching for them yesterday. I was listening to the news quiz, which is on Radio 4 at 6:30 on Friday. I was driving from my constituency office to the home. For 10 minutes, all I heard, and it's satirical, it was just diatribe against Conservatives, not the government. And I did listen to that and think, for goodness sake, where is the balance in that? So, yes, I'm afraid to say, despite the fact that I've always been a big supporter of the BBC, that struck me as completely biased.
OK, you understand that a news quiz is comedy and nothing to do with actual news?
There was nothing in that 10 minutes that was remotely...
But you do understand that it's not
Of course, no, I would be the first one. I love it when politicians get
quiz.
lampooned, but that was the whole point. There wasn't actually anything in it, in that particular regard, which struck me as being sort of amusing. It was actually just more the drive. It may not be the news quiz, but it was 6:30 on a Friday, and as I say, it didn't strike me as being particularly satirical. It was just people standing up.
So you do think they're biased?
Well, that was just look. Listen to the first 10 minutes. I challenge any of your audience.
Do you think BBC News
is biased? It was totally biased.
That upset you, didn't it?
It did upset me, and I think also, you know, it's a satirical comedy panel show, and that is not held to the same standards as BBC News is in the same way that many other parts of the BBC are not held to the same standards. CBeebies, for example, whatever. BBC News is in a separate category, and also comedy has an important role in saying things in ways that other programmes can't, in exposing the comedy and the humour and the darkness and the sadness and the troubles in many other things as well. And I'm sure during the Brown and Blair eras, it was doing exactly the same thing to the government at that point in time, and I'm sure if Labour come into power, it will do exactly the same thing again.
It's about power, isn't it? That's what satire feeds off of, mocking power, and the government, therefore, is always going to have the lion's share of that. I mean, have I got news for you? Always getting in trouble for that, aren't they? But, I mean, it's just not the same as news. Or, I mean, the review itself is looking at online coverage in the first place, which is where we started from on this. It's just not something that's really should be up for
the Labour Shadow Minister was ready for me, though.
We think the BBC is one of the most trusted news services in this country, and it's absolutely right that they are held to a high standard, and that's something that we think does happen and should continue to happen.
Yeah, but my question is, do you think they're biased on occasion?
No, I don't think the BBC are biased. I think they are held to a high standard. They are trusted by the British public and across the world, and that's something, as an institution, we should continue to hold in great value.
Well, people have got involved, haven't they?
Yes, there was a tweet here that said that with regards to news, bias is in the eye of the beholder, which is accurate, I think, when it comes to news. Bias is generally down to someone's perception of it. And again, it comes back to perceptions. And the minister there talking about, Huw Merriman talking about comedy, he thought it wasn't very funny, so therefore he thought it was biased. And we'd heard from the panellists earlier in the programme who said that Ofcom pretty much give the BBC a clean bill of health when it comes to all of this.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you're funny, but I don't think you're biased.
I think you're biased in that view. Anyway, let's bring you some of the morning's top stories, shall we? Israel has said that 24 of its soldiers have been killed during intense fighting in Gaza. It's the highest number of Israeli soldiers killed in a single day since fighting began back in October last year. A top Houthi official has told the US and the United Kingdom to expect a response every minute after the countries carried out strikes on sites associated with the group in Yemen. Underground sites were among those targeted following continued attacks on ships within the Red Sea. A new blood test could change the way Alzheimer's is diagnosed, with the disease detected 15 years before symptoms. Experts think it could lead to blanket screening for the over 50s. And an amber weather warning for wind will come into place in Scotland this evening as the UK and Ireland braces for yet more bad weather with Storm Jocelyn approaching. It's the second storm in as many days to hit the British Isles.
Now, let's talk about Storm Isha. It barely eased up, and there's already another one on the way. That's Storm Jocelyn. Let's speak to Leah Smith, councillor in Antrim. Hi, good to see you. Thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. How bad is it already, Leah? Good morning.
Good morning. Yes, the weather is starting to pick up again here. The winds are quite strong and the rain isn't easing, so it's still pretty rough.
How bad was it yesterday?
It was really, really bad. It was the worst one we've seen in a long time. The winds were absolutely frightening. The devastation that it caused around here, we had a lot of damage, a lot of trees that had fallen. It caused a lot of disruption. There was massive pressure on our emergency services to respond to the amount of calls that they had received. A lot of homes were without power. I think at the moment we still have about 7,000 homes across Northern Ireland that are still currently without power. So we're still trying to get over Storm Isha before Storm Jocelyn arrives. So that's obviously going to impact our clean-up of that and going forward.
What advice are you offering to local people in your area, Leah?
Yeah, we are constantly pushing out information to them. When we get the weather warnings, we let them know what sort of weather to expect, what that means for them, especially in terms of council, how that impacts our services. We also let them know if it's obviously with extreme weather, if it's rain, we let them know where their local sandbags are, make sure they're replenished. And obviously the emergency numbers, everybody is given the emergency numbers should they need it. And the councillors, us as local reps, we are constantly pushing it out in our social media to tell people, you know, to contact us if they have any emergencies that we can ring through on our elected reps line. So constantly assessing on an hour-by-hour basis and pushing out the relevant information as and when we can.
And how are you going to see out the storm, Leah?
Sorry?
How are you going to see out the storm?
We'll be making sure that everything is charged up in case we run out of power. I know with us as council, we'll be assessing it on an hour-by-hour basis. We have a lot of some of our caravan parks are closed. We assess our parks and our outdoor spaces on an hour-by-hour basis to see what they are like. And then obviously just making sure, pushing out those information and those emergency numbers and letting people know where they can get their sandbags and things. So that's assessed on an hour-by-hour basis, and we'll just keep them informed as much as possible.
OK, for now, good luck. Thanks for taking the time to join us. Thank you.
Bye.
Now, what do Share and In the Heat of the Night have in common? A gentleman called Norman Jewison. He's died at the age of 97. Who is he?
Well, he was an absolute legend, wasn't he, Kay? He was a film director and filmmaker that had numerous hits from films such as Moonstruck, which, as you've just said, starred Cher, who's in her own right an icon, to also rock operas as well in the theatres, Jesus Christ Superstar. So he's someone that covered a range of topics in his work, from political satire to comedy, but he's also someone who spoke widely about how racial injustice in the US also contributed to much of his work as well.
In the Heat of the Night. I think we've got a clip, actually.
Ooh, what are you? You a northern boy? What's a northern boy like you doing all the way down here?
I was waiting for the train.
But now there ain't no trains this time of morning.
Tuesdays only, 4:05 to Memphis.
You say.
Now, you've not seen that movie, have you?
I haven't, but I have heard of the movie. It's quite significant for its time, wasn't it?
It really, really is. It's about a black man who finds himself in the Deep South, and he's a police officer. They don't know that to start with, and he's accused of murder, a murder he did not commit. Absolutely fascinating.
And they work together in the end, didn't they?
They do in the end, but it takes a lot of it takes a lot of effort. You said and something like that, and then Jesus Christ Superstar, and then working with Cher.
Yeah, he's worked with absolute legends from all over the world as well. Denzel Washington is someone that he also worked with as well. Yeah. So he's someone I imagine that lots of people will remember very fondly of, and he has worked with so many people that I'm sure the tributes today will continue to pour in.
Yeah, 97 years young. For now, thanks very much indeed. Cher has actually offered a comment. This is what she has said. Farewell, sweet prince. Thank you for one of the greatest, happiest, most fun experiences of my life. Without you, I would not have my beautiful golden man, talking about the Oscar, in reference to that Oscar that she won for her role as Loretta Castorini in the 1988 movie. Talking about the Oscar nominations coming up next, will Barbie dance the night away?
Hey, Barbie. Can I come to your house
Katie
today?
will be with us.
Sure. I don't have anything big planned, just a giant blowout party with all the Barbies and planned choreography and a bespoke song. You should stop by.
United Kingdom.
These last few years have seen some huge stories. And these stories have been driven by politics, by politicians, the people in power.
You must stay at home.
And it's my job to figure out how these decisions made by politicians impact all of us in our everyday lives.
This is the worst thing I've ever been through in my life.
People turn up here with their child stuff in a black sack and just say, I don't want to.
And that is what it is. It's first-class poverty.
Is this an example of the welfare state failing?
We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
These are stories that affect us all. Millions of children are now having to catch up. Some stories have changed all of our lives. Because like the residents, the staff are being infected. Politicians, they make decisions all of the time, and it's our job to hold them to account.
I wonder if you will take this opportunity to apologise to those families.
But in the end, the real power doesn't actually lie with the politicians. The real power lies with the people. I'm Nick Martin. I'm the People and Politics correspondent at Sky News.
Fly Emirates, fly better. Fly Emirates, fly better.
Hello again, everybody. Wilfred's standing by for us. He'll be with us from the top of the hour. What's caught your eye, Wilfred? Good morning.
Good morning again. Lots on the agenda today, Kay, and the Post Office Horizon inquiry is restarting again at 10 a.m. Today we hear from Robert Daly. Now, he is one of the Post Office investigators. When we heard from Stephen Bradshaw, a fellow Post Office investigator, a couple of weeks ago, it was pretty compelling stuff, pointing the finger towards his bosses. So we'll be monitoring that. We'll also have the latest on the UK-US strikes on the Houthis. Professor Michael Clark will be here, as will Tobias Elwood. Also the latest on the Israel-Gaza war. It was, of course, the most deadly day yesterday for IDF forces in Gaza. And Jane and Kamali will have all the reaction to the Oscar noms, which I know you're finally going to get to talk to an expert about next. So I will be quiet and let you pick that
don't
up.
don't go away, because our Katie's here, and I want to know who you think, whether it's going to be Barbie or Oppenheimer or Killers of the Flower Moon, that's going to get the most Oscar noms. What do you think? And then I'll put it to Katie.
Well, I mean, as I've been saying throughout the morning, you know, I would have given noms to Top Gun Maverick and films like that never get nominations because they're not arty enough. Of those three, I preferred Oppenheimer the most.
Yes. What do you
I
think?
am so disappointed that Wilf hasn't chosen Barbie. What a shocker.
He liked it. He says he liked it, didn't you, Wilf?
But he's going for Oppenheimer.
I liked Barbie. Obviously, people would say this is a silly comment, but the lack of a serious storyline meant I got bored. Now, maybe that was a given that Barbie wouldn't have a really strong storyline, but I just thought it was all a bit silly for it to be Oscar nominated. But again, as I've said, I'm not the best judge of these things. I tend to prefer more movies that didn't even get an Oscar nomination. So.
OK, what about Oppenheimer? Did you like that one?
I did. I thought that was excellent. It got me reading much more into the history around it. It was clearly epic and meant you had to go to the cinema, which I also love, for the movies that, you know, are worth spending that extra money on.
Well, let me tell you that Gareth fell asleep during Oppenheimer.
Yeah. Well, I fell asleep during the Flower Moon one, which I didn't go to the cinema for. I watched at home. I thought that was really boring, despite what incredible cast and team behind it.
Oh, OK. Well, let's see what happens. I'll let you dash off because I know you're with us again, top of the hour. Thanks very much, Wilfred. Thank you.
Philistines, the lot of you. That's all I've got to say. Should we start by talking about Oppenheimer, because that was the one that really led the way at the BAFTAs. We're expecting it to do the same this year. They do say with these awards ceremonies, when it's your time, and it does feel very much like this year it's going to be Christopher Nolan's year. It's a beautiful piece. Can you believe that Christopher Nolan, despite having made Inception, Dunkirk, has never won a BAFTA, has never won an Oscar? So it does really feel like this is something that's long overdue.
And Dunkirk was amazing.
I know. He's one of the best directors that we have in this country. His films have made over £5 billion in total. So it is very much feeling like the mood music is playing.
And a good leading man.
Great in Cillian Murphy. I mean, it's uncanny how much he looked like Robert Oppenheimer as well. Given that this is this intelligent, thoughtful piece, it's something very different for Christopher Nolan. He didn't want to use CGI to show the atomic bomb. It was a real challenge for him to make this movie, a labour of love, and I think actually he's going to be richly rewarded. It does feel like it is his time, this award season.
This is nominations that we're
Nominations. We're going to hear at lunchtime what the nominations for the Oscars are.
OK, 1:30 London time.
Yes, so it dominated the BAFTAs. We're expecting, again, it's going to be one that we're talking about a lot.
Talk to us about Barbie.
Barbie, well, look, in the Battle of Barbenheimer, we know Barbie is basically the film that got everyone out into cinemas, combined the box office gross of Barbie and Oppenheimer. It's £2 billion those films made, at a time when cinemas are struggling to get people in. These are the two films that got people out. Barbie didn't do so well at the BAFTAs. We were thinking that it would at least get a nomination for Best Picture. Didn't end up happening in the end, but we're thinking because the Oscars are a bit more American, it's a very American film, very American doll, isn't it? So we are expecting it to do a little bit better when we hear what the nominations are a little later on. Killers of the Flower Moon.
Oh, stand by, just hold your flipping horses. I'm just Ken. There are 3 songs from this movie, but there can only be 2 songs that are nominated, so they'll have to choose which ones.
I feel like, it's maybe a long hope, a long stretch that we all want the Kenergy that is Ryan Gosling's I'm Just Ken song to be in there. But, I mean, it's delivered so much joy. But, yes, you're right. It's Billie Eilish has won the Golden Globe with her Barbie film, song, so it's likely that will be nominated.
Now, if you think about Ken, as in Ken and Barbie, you must... I mean, which former politician comes to mind?
Oh, Ken Clark?
Guess again.
OK, guess again. Matt Hancock?
What about this?
I'm just Ken, where I see love, she sees a friend. What will it take for her to see?
I like it. I think it's good on him for going for it. ridiculous. It's a bit cringe.
idiot.
Oh.
As a gay man, my vote's for Ryan Gosling. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, he does well. As a straight woman, my vote's with Ryan Gosling.
Being told I have to say he was on holiday having fun with his family, you still look like an idiot.
Yeah, I mean, good on him though, but it is a little bit cringe.
But also the message of it is kind of, you know, not exactly male empowerment, is it? And then he's on the BBC.
Going on. He was the health secretary at the time.
Yeah, OK. Maybe I take it back then. But yeah. Nevertheless, we'd like to see Ryan Gosling feature, or at the very least, can we please have Ryan Gosling doing a performance at the Academy Awards?
He made
that film, didn't he?
You mentioned that.
Sorry?
Flower Moon.
Killers of the Flower Moon. Look,
Too long, Wolf says.
Well, I mean, it's another one like Christopher Nolan's one that's over 3 hours, so it is incredibly long. But, I mean, just the masterful work that Martin Scorsese is producing in his later years. He has, by his own admission, said that he thinks he's probably only got 1 or 2 more films or time to make these films of this weight. But it is just an extraordinary film. The quality that you see in Killers of the Flower Moon, it's a brilliant retelling of a true story about the sort of systematic robbing and murdering of Native Americans in Oklahoma back in the 20s. Yeah. It's a very serious subject, but it's beautifully made. Can we talk very quickly as well about the holdovers? Paul Giamatti, it's a brilliant story that is set at a boarding school. He is this teacher that's very grumpy and has to look after the kids over the Christmas holidays, kids that people don't want. It's just beautiful, really interesting one to watch. I talked to him last week and he said he's very coy. He doesn't think he's going to be nominated, but I think he will.
I saw that interview. It was great. 1:30 is when we hear the nominations. Every time I am using satire when I'm talking about Matt Hancock, his agent or his SPAD sends me a text while I'm on air. So do you think it's going to happen now?
He's the hardest working SPAD in the business.
No, it's not, because I've locked him. We are going to see you at 7 o'clock in the morning with all today's top stories. Wilfred is coming up next. Hope you've enjoyed the show as much as we have. Don't forget 1:30 for the Oscar noms.